The sun rises over a fertile valley in the Peloponnese, a region in southern Greece carved by the slow, determined flow of the Eurotas River. This is Laconia, a landscape of profound natural contrasts, cradled by the formidable mountain ranges of Parnon to the east and Taygetos to the west. While the fertile soil supported a thriving agricultural life, it was a place that would become synonymous not with abundance, but with an unparalleled martial discipline. This history begins long before the name Sparta was universally feared. It begins in the Bronze Age, in a prosperous Mycenaean kingdom centered on the city of Lacedaemon. Archaeological excavations, particularly those around the Acropolis of modern Sparta, reveal a site of significant power and influence during the late Helladic period. This was the world of the Homeric epics, where legendary figures like Menelaus and his queen Helen ruled a city known for its vast wealth and a fortress of immense strength. The foundations of a large palace complex, elaborate tombs, and extensive trade networks indicate a prosperous society, deeply integrated into the sophisticated Bronze Age world of the Aegean. This was a place of vibrant cultural exchange, with its kings commanding a formidable military force and wielding authority over a wide territory. The era of this Mycenaean splendor, however, was not destined to last. It was swept away by a seismic shift in the Greek world around 1100 BC. From the north came the Dorian migration, a new people speaking a distinct dialect of Greek, their arrival altering the demographic and political landscape forever. The Dorians, with their claim to the Lacedaemonian throne through the lineage of Heracles, a divine ancestor revered across the Greek world, conquered the existing populace and established their own dominion. This conquest was not a total obliteration, but a gradual process of subjugation, leading to the formation of a society with a distinct and rigid social hierarchy. The pre-Dorian inhabitants of the valley, the Achaeans, were reduced to a servile population, their status formalized as helots. The political structure that emerged from this conquest was a rare and singular phenomenon, the dual kingship. Two kings, one from the Aegead line and one from the Europontid line, ruled concurrently. This shared authority was a deliberate check on power, a unique constitutional arrangement born of conquest and the need for a balanced government. They were not absolute monarchs but war leaders, ritual figures, and judges, their power checked by a council of elders and, eventually, a body of powerful magistrates. This period of transition was tumultuous. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. The Dorians, now known as Spartiates, found themselves a military elite in a state of perpetual tension with the vast, conquered Helot population. The fear of rebellion, a fear rooted in the memories of a brutal subjugation, led to a desperate need for a new social and political order. This is where the story of Lycurgus and the Great Retra takes center stage. While a semi-mythical figure, his reforms are indisputably the bedrock of the Spartan state. The Great Retra, a legal and religious charter, fundamentally reshaped Spartan society, steering it away from the cultural norms of its Dorian neighbors and toward an existence defined by communal living, austerity, and an unwavering focus on military excellence. It established the institutions of the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, and the Ephors, the magistrates who held the kings themselves accountable. The reforms were radical, a complete re-engineering of civic life to prevent internal dissent and forge a society of disciplined warriors. The legacy of Lycurgus was not a peaceful utopia, but a rigid and unyielding military machine, meticulously engineered to maintain control over a hostile populace and to ensure its own survival through force. Our journey through Spartan history now shifts to the Bronze Age, an era of legendary kings and epic conflicts. This is the world of the city of Lacedaemon, a name echoing throughout the works of Homer. The Iliad and the Odyssey portray a kingdom of great wealth and power, presided over by King Menelaus and his queen Helen. While their story is steeped in myth, recent archaeological findings at the site of ancient Sparta provide tangible evidence for a Mycenaean settlement of significant importance during the late Helladic period, roughly 1600–1100 BC. Excavations conducted by the British School at Athens have uncovered remnants of a large, fortified settlement on the Acropolis of modern Sparta. The stratigraphy reveals a prosperous community, not just a small village, with its heyday occurring around the 13th century BC. This suggests that the site was indeed a central hub of a Mycenaean state. The findings include fragments of a palace, evidence of a large tholos tomb, and numerous artifacts such as bronze weapons, gold jewelry, and decorated pottery. These objects, many of which show intricate craftsmanship and indicate extensive trade, demonstrate a highly stratified and affluent society. This was a place where kings commanded a military force and where a distinct aristocracy lived a life of luxury, a stark contrast to the austerity of later Sparta. The presence of Mycenaean pottery, often imported from centres like Mycenae and Tiryns, reveals that Lacedaemon was not an isolated kingdom, but was deeply connected to the wider Aegean trade networks. The trade in olive oil, wine, and other goods flowed through its ports, funding the very wealth that Homer immortalized. This economic prosperity allowed the kings of Lacedaemon to maintain a military force capable of participating in large-scale expeditions, such as the legendary campaign against Troy. The Iliad recounts Menelaus's prominent role in this alliance, a literary depiction that, while embellished, likely reflects a historical reality of Lacedaemon's military significance. The period's reliance on bronze for tools and weaponry, a resource-intensive technology, required a stable political and economic system. The kings of Lacedaemon, much like those at Mycenae, commanded a hierarchical bureaucracy to manage resources and maintain order. Clay tablets found in other Mycenaean centres, inscribed in Linear B script, document a complex palace economy with a centralized administration. While no Linear B tablets have been found at Sparta itself, the consistent archaeological and literary evidence confirms that the kingdom of Menelaus was a functioning state within the broader Mycenaean system. However, around 1100 BC, this vibrant world began to crumble. The causes of the Mycenaean collapse remain a subject of debate among historians, with theories ranging from internal conflicts and economic breakdown to climate change and foreign invasions. Whatever the cause, the palatial centres across the Aegean were destroyed or abandoned, and the Linear B script was lost. Lacedaemon, like its counterparts, fell into a period of decline and depopulation. This marked the end of its heroic age and set the stage for the arrival of a new people who would reshape the valley in their own indelible image. The stories of its heroic past would survive, but the social and political reality of this land would be fundamentally transformed. The bronze-hilted splendor of Lacedaemon would not endure. Its collapse marked a profound and chaotic interlude in the history of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Following the widespread societal breakdown of the Late Bronze Age, the Laconian plain was fundamentally transformed by the arrival of a new people from the north. These were the Dorians, a group who migrated into the southern Greek mainland, bringing with them a distinct dialect and a different set of cultural practices. Their entry into the region was not a unified single event, but a complex, centuries-long process of settlement, displacement, and subjugation. The Dorians' presence is visible in the archaeological record through a shift in material culture. The intricate painted pottery of the Mycenaean era gave way to simpler, more rectilinear designs of the proto-geometric period. Burial practices also changed. While the Mycenaeans favoured elaborate tholos tombs, the Dorians introduced new forms of burial. These changes reflect not just a cultural transition, but a complete reorganization of society. The centralized palace economies and bureaucratic structures that defined the Mycenaean kingdoms were gone, replaced by smaller, more fragmented communities. To legitimize their conquest of the Laconian plain, the Dorians invoked a powerful and ancient myth, the return of the Heracleidae. They claimed to be the descendants of Heracles, the famed hero and son of Zeus. According to this narrative, their ancestors had been exiled from the Peloponnese, and now, after centuries of wandering, they were returning to reclaim the throne of Lacedaemon as their rightful inheritance. This genealogical claim provided a divine sanction for their conquest, transforming a military subjugation into an act of ancestral justice. It was a potent political tool that unified the disparate Dorian tribes under a common purpose and justified the new, iron-hard reality they imposed. This reality was a society of strict stratification. The Dorians, now the ruling elite, established a new social order. The indigenous Achaean population of Laconia was not exterminated, but instead was reduced to a state of collective serfdom, a people bound to the land. They were known as the Helots, a class whose labor would forever free the Spartan citizens from agricultural necessity, allowing them to dedicate their entire lives to warfare. This arrangement, built on a foundation of ethnic and social subjugation, was fraught with inherent tension and a constant threat of revolt. From this new order, a unique political institution emerged, the dual kingship. Two royal families, the Agiad and the Eurypontid, both claiming descent from Heracles, shared the highest office. This divided authority was a practical solution to the complexities of the conquest, preventing a single ruler from consolidating absolute power. It also provided a vital system of checks and balances, with each king serving as a check on the other's ambitions. This diarchy, a rare and deliberate constitutional choice, would become a cornerstone of Spartan government for nearly 9 centuries, a symbol of their unique political identity forged in the fires of migration and conquest. The arrival of the Dorians had not only brought a new people to the valley, but had established a new paradigm of governance that would shape its destiny for the ages. The establishment of a new order in Laconia following the Dorian conquest necessitated a political structure to manage the conquered territory and its people. From this era of societal upheaval emerged a system of governance that was highly unusual for the ancient Greek world, the dual kingship. This unique diarchy was not an accident, but a deliberate constitutional arrangement that would define Sparta's political landscape for centuries. The supreme office was held by 2 men, each from a different royal house, the Agiad and the Eurypontid, respectively. Both dynasties claimed descent from Heracles, a shared lineage that provided a powerful mythic and ideological foundation for their joint rule, binding them together while simultaneously maintaining a constant, inherent tension. The 2 royal houses held equal authority in most respects, a constitutional check designed to prevent a single ruler from accumulating absolute power. This arrangement was practical, ensuring that military and religious authority was never vested in one individual. The kings were not absolute monarchs, but were first and foremost military commanders. As heads of the army, they led their forces in campaign. This dual command system often meant that only one king was deployed in the field at any given time, a measure that protected the continuity of the monarchy. Their military authority was extensive, but not limitless. They held the power of life and death over their troops while on campaign, but their decisions could be challenged or overridden by a council of 5 magistrates upon their return. In addition to their military functions, the Spartan kings held significant religious responsibilities. They served as the chief priests of the state cults of Zeus and Apollo, holding a hereditary religious authority. This role was central to their legitimacy, as it connected the earthly monarchy to the divine. Their participation in key religious festivals and sacrifices was a vital part of Spartan civic life, reinforcing the piety and order of the state. The king's influence also extended into the legislative and judicial spheres. They were ex officio members of the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, a body comprised of 28 men over the age of 60. This council, a powerful organ of state, proposed legislation and served as the high court for serious crimes, including homicide. While the kings were part of this council, their votes were equal to those of the other members, further limiting their personal power. However, the most significant check on royal power came from the ephors, 5 annually elected magistrates. The ephors were the true political force of the state. They presided over the Gerousia and the citizen assembly, controlled foreign policy, and had the extraordinary power to depose the kings if they were found guilty of malfeasance. This system of checks and balances ensured that while the kings were revered as military and religious leaders, they were ultimately servants of the state. The diarchy, therefore, was a brilliant constitutional innovation that allowed for both continuity and accountability, a system that would prove remarkably stable, safeguarding Sparta from the political turmoil that plagued so many of its Greek neighbours. It was a singular product of a singular society, born of conquest, but refined by a profound understanding of the need to balance authority with control. The internal pressures within Spartan society following the Dorian conquest necessitated a fundamental restructuring of the state. This transformation is attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. Though his existence is a matter of scholarly debate, his influence on Sparta is undeniable. He is the architect of a radical social and political system that would set Sparta apart from all other Greek city-states. The foundation of his reforms was the Great Retra, a constitutional document that was both a political charter and a divine oracle. This text, whose contents are known through later historians like Plutarch, was meant to be a direct communication from the Delphic oracle, giving it an unquestionable sacred authority. The Retra's core purpose was to address the growing inequality and political instability that had plagued early Spartan society. It aimed to create a state of military and social equality among the Spartiates. A key component of this was a land redistribution, a measure designed to eliminate significant wealth disparities. By ensuring that every citizen held an equal plot of land, known as a kleros, the Retra sought to remove the economic rivalries that threatened social cohesion. Each kleros was worked by helots, providing the citizen with the resources to devote his entire life to military training, free from the burdens of manual labor. The reforms were not merely economic, they were a total re-engineering of civic life. The Retra mandated the establishment of the agoge, a state-run education and training program that would replace the traditional family unit as the primary source of a boy's upbringing. From the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes and raised collectively in barracks, where they were subjected to a rigorous regimen of physical training, combat drills, and psychological conditioning. The goal was to instill absolute loyalty to the state, discipline, endurance, and a profound indifference to hardship or personal discomfort. Lycurgus's reforms also extended to the political sphere. The Retra reinforced the authority of the existing political institutions, but with a new emphasis on checks and balances. It affirmed the roles of the two kings, the Gerousia and the popular assembly, but also created the office of the ephors, 5 annually elected magistrates who held immense power. The ephors were granted the authority to oversee the kings, to preside over the assembly, and to manage foreign policy, creating a formidable body that could hold all other state organs in check. This system was designed to prevent any single faction or individual from gaining too much power, ensuring the stability and continuity of the Spartan state. The Retra also instituted a communal way of life. The syssitia, or common messes, became a mandatory part of every citizen's existence. All Spartiates, regardless of rank, were required to eat their meals together in these dining halls. This practice was intended to reinforce the bonds of camaraderie and to discourage the accumulation of personal wealth, as lavish private meals were forbidden. By making every aspect of a citizen's life a communal experience, the reforms aimed to create a society where collective welfare was valued above all else. This radical social engineering was the direct result of the fear of Helot rebellion and the need for a unified, disciplined military caste. Lycurgus's vision transformed Sparta into a unique political and social entity, a martial state unlike any other in the Greek world, with its very existence predicated on austerity, military rigor, and unwavering devotion to the collective good. With the Lycurgan reforms in place, Sparta was transformed into a disciplined and unified military state. This new system was soon tested in a series of conflicts that would fundamentally shape its destiny. The most significant of these was the First Messenian War, a conflict that began in the late 8th century BC. Sparta, a state with limited fertile land in its own Laconian plain, sought to acquire the rich agricultural resources of its western neighbour, Messenia. This was not a quick raid, but a protracted and methodical campaign aimed at total subjugation. The First Messenian War, as documented by ancient authors like Pausanias, was a long and grueling affair. It lasted for approximately 20 years, a testament to the stubborn resistance of the Messenian people. The conflict was primarily fought as a war of attrition, with Spartan forces systematically besieging and capturing Messenian towns and villages. The Messenians, though outnumbered and less organized than the burgeoning Spartan army, used their knowledge of the local terrain to great effect, engaging in guerrilla warfare and defending their mountain strongholds. Sparta's victory, though hard-won, was absolute. The Messenian population was not driven from their lands or integrated into Spartan society as citizens. Instead, they were reduced to a state of collective serfdom, a unique form of state-owned slavery that would become the economic foundation of the Spartan state. They were formally named the Helots. These Helots were bound to the land they had once owned, forced to work the fields and hand over a fixed quota of their produce to their Spartan masters. The vast fertile plains of Messenia were divided into parcels and allotted to the Spartiate citizens, with each plot known as a kleros. This system ensured that every Spartiate, regardless of birth or individual skill, had a guaranteed income that freed them from the need for manual labor. The enslavement of the Helots had immediate and profound consequences for the Spartan way of life. The Helot labor force provided the economic surplus necessary to sustain the citizen army. With their material needs met, Spartiate males could dedicate their entire lives to military training, from childhood through old age. The military rigor of the agoge was made possible by this system. The Helot-run economy was the engine that powered the Spartan military machine. However, this newfound prosperity and military dominance came at a steep price. The Helots vastly outnumbered their Spartan masters, creating a demographic imbalance that was a constant source of anxiety. Historians estimate that the Helots may have outnumbered the Spartiates by a margin of 10 to 1 or even more. This sheer numerical superiority created a state of perpetual fear within the Spartan elite. The spectre of a Helot uprising became the central preoccupation of Spartan policy, shaping their foreign affairs and domestic regulations for centuries to come. The conquest of Messenia, a triumph in the short term, created a long-term problem that would forever haunt the Spartan state. The fear of a Helot revolt was the primary driver of their unique, austere, and disciplined society, a consequence that was a direct result of their decision to build their power on the foundation of a subjugated people. The victory in Messenia, while providing the resources for Spartan dominance, also planted the seeds of the vulnerability and social rigidity that would ultimately contribute to its decline. The conquest of Messenia and the subsequent enslavement of its populace created the economic bedrock of the Spartan state. With the Helots bound to the land to work as agricultural serfs, the Spartan citizen class, the Spartiates, was entirely liberated from the demands of manual labor. This arrangement was not merely a matter of convenience, it was a constitutional necessity. The Helot-run agricultural economy produced a surplus of goods that provided the material sustenance for every Spartiate household. This income, guaranteed by the state, was vital. It ensured that every male citizen, regardless of individual wealth or talent, had the financial security to pursue the sole occupation considered worthy: warfare. The Helots, however, were not simply a passive labor force. They were a subjugated population, perpetually resentful of their condition. Ancient sources, particularly those from Athens, highlight the brutal nature of their servitude. They could be summarily executed by Spartiate youths without trial, a practice formerly known as the cryptia, or secret service, a chilling display of state, sanctioned terror designed to keep the Helots in a state of fear. The Helots were forbidden from leaving their assigned kleros, and were subjected to beatings and ritual humiliation. The state's obsession with control was a direct response to a profound demographic imbalance. While Spartiate numbers were in a perpetual state of decline due to the rigors of their military lifestyle and low birth rates, the Helot population continued to grow. This demographic disparity, with Helots potentially outnumbering their masters by a margin of 7 or 10 to 1, created a permanent internal security crisis. The sheer scale of the Helot population made them a constant threat. Their rebellions were not merely local uprisings, but were full-scale wars that threatened the very existence of the Spartan state. This existential fear shaped Spartan domestic and foreign policy for centuries. Domestically, it led to the institutionalization of the agogo, the rigorous state-run military training that every Spartiate male was required to undergo. The system's primary function was to create an elite fighting force that was always prepared for a Helot uprising. The Spartans did not build a standing army to conquer the world. They built one to maintain control over their own territory. This internal tension also dictated Sparta's foreign policy. The state was often reluctant to engage in prolonged foreign campaigns or naval conflicts, as it required its full military force to remain close to home. The fear of a Helot revolt in the absence of a large number of Spartiate men was a constant constraint on their strategic decisions. This reluctance to project power was often viewed by other Greek city-states as a weakness, but it was in fact a rational response to their unique political and demographic reality. The Helot problem, therefore, was not a mere inconvenience but a foundational element of the Spartan state. It was the source of their military rigor, their political conservatism, and their social rigidity. The Spartiates' celebrated discipline and austerity were not the product of abstract virtue, but a necessary response to the reality of living in a state of permanent tension with a vast and resentful populace. The Helots were not just the engine of the Spartan economy, they were the ghost in the machine, the constant, invisible threat that shaped every aspect of the Spartan experience. The subjugation of the Messenians and their reduction to the status of Helots did not bring lasting peace to the Spartan state. In fact, it ignited a deep and enduring conflict. In the mid-7th century BC, the Helots of Messenia, fueled by centuries of resentment and oppression, rose in a desperate and coordinated revolt. This uprising, known to history as the Second Messenian War, was not a mere skirmish, but a brutal, protracted conflict that pushed Sparta to the brink of total collapse. The Messenians, fighting for their freedom, proved to be formidable opponents, leveraging their knowledge of the rugged terrain and their numerical superiority to great effect. The war lasted for an estimated 17 years, a period of sustained military engagement that drained Spartan resources and manpower. The Helots were not without allies. Several other Greek city-states, particularly Argos and Arcadia, saw an opportunity to weaken their rival and provided military support and encouragement to the Messenian cause. The conflict was characterized by a combination of conventional hoplite warfare on the plains and intense, drawn-out guerrilla actions in the mountains of Messenia, where the Helots could evade direct confrontation with the disciplined Spartan phalanx. The Spartans, on the other hand, had to fight a war on two fronts, one against the rebelling Helots and the other against their Greek allies, who aimed to undermine their power. The existential threat posed by the Second Messenian War was the final catalyst for the institutionalization of the agoge and the complete reorientation of Spartan society towards military life. The war underscored a critical vulnerability in their system. Their small citizen body was insufficient to maintain control over a large, hostile populace without being in a state of constant, total readiness. The fear of another, even more devastating revolt became a permanent fixture in the Spartan consciousness. As a direct result of this brutal experience, the state's focus shifted definitively away from all pursuits other than war. The artistic, poetic, and musical traditions that had flourished in early Laconia were suppressed or abandoned in favor of a singular, state-sponsored militarism. The victory in the Second Messenian War cemented the Spartiate status as the preeminent military caste of the Greek world. It was a brutal triumph that came at a significant cost. but it also reinforced the very system it was fought to preserve. The Helots were once again subjugated, and the Spartan way of life, with its emphasis on austerity, discipline, and communal living, became unyielding. The war transformed what may have been a set of evolving social norms into a rigid, non-negotiable legal and cultural framework. The fear of a future Helot uprising became a permanent driver of Spartan domestic policy, leading to a society that was permanently on a war footing. The Second Messenian War did not merely end a rebellion, it completed the process of Sparta's transformation, solidifying its identity as a militaristic state dedicated to the complete and total mastery of its population, both citizen and servile, to ensure its own survival. The victory in the Second Messenian War cemented the Spartiates' conviction that their survival depended on the complete and total dedication of their citizenry to military life. This belief gave rise to the agoge, a state-mandated training regimen that served as the very bedrock of the Spartan system. This was not a voluntary program, but a compulsory state-sponsored process of physical and psychological conditioning that began at the age of 7. From this tender age, a Spartan male was removed from his family home and placed into a collective environment, living in barracks with other boys of his age group, where his life would be entirely governed by the state. The agoge was a brutal and methodical system designed to strip away individual identity and instill a singular, unyielding loyalty to the state. The boys were trained under the supervision of an padonomos, an official appointed by the state, and were divided into age-based units. Their education was not focused on academics or intellectual pursuits. Instead, the curriculum was centered on physical endurance, combat skills, and group cohesion. They were taught to read and write only to a rudimentary degree, just enough to fulfill civic duties and understand military orders. Their primary lessons were in the arts of warfare, wrestling, boxing, and the use of the spear and shield. Life in the barracks was austere and challenging by design. The boys were given minimal food and were encouraged to supplement their diet through stealth and theft, a practice that was intended to sharpen their cunning and resourcefulness for future military campaigns. This was not viewed as a crime, but as a test of skill. If they were caught, they were not punished for the theft itself, but for their lack of cleverness. Their clothing was minimal, and they were forbidden from wearing shoes, measures that were intended to harden their bodies against the elements and increase their endurance. The social dynamics of the agoge were as important as the physical training. The system was designed to foster an intense sense of camaraderie and brotherhood among the boys. They lived, trained, and ate together, forging bonds that would be unbreakable on the battlefield. The elder boys were given authority over the younger ones, a form of mentorship that introduced them to the principles of leadership and discipline. This hierarchical structure within the agoge mirrored the Spartan army, creating a seamless transition from the training ground to the battlefield. The psychological component of the agoge was perhaps its most radical element. The system was a form of psychological indoctrination that replaced traditional family bonds with an absolute loyalty to the state. Boys were taught to suppress their emotions, to endure pain without complaint, and to value the collective good above their own lives. They were also exposed to the harsh realities of their society. They were encouraged to participate in a rite of passage known as the Cryptia, or secret service, where they would be sent out into the countryside to live off the land and terrorize the Helot population. This ritual served a dual purpose. It was both a brutal training exercise in stealth and a chilling form of social control, a constant reminder to the Helots of the force that kept them in check. The agoge was not merely an education, it was a process of human engineering, a forge that molded boys into living instruments of the state, their bodies and minds completely devoted to the preservation of Sparta. The Spartan state, for all its military rigor, could not exist in a vacuum. Its very foundation was built on a complex and rigid social structure that depended on two subordinate classes, the Helots and the Perioeci. This division of labor was a deliberate constitutional design, a social machine where every class served a specific, non-negotiable purpose to maintain the dominance of the Spartiates. The Helots, as previously discussed, were the agricultural engine of the state. They were a subjugated population, primarily of Messenian and Laconian descent, who were owned not by individual Spartiates, but by the state itself. They were bound to the kleros, the land allotted to each Spartiate, and were forced to work it, turning over a fixed quota of their produce. This system was a form of state-owned serfdom that ensured every Spartiate citizen, regardless of personal wealth or family name, had the economic security to dedicate his life entirely to military training and service. The Helot economy was a necessary evil, providing the food and resources that freed the Spartiates from the burdens of manual labor, but also creating a constant internal security threat. The Perioeci, or dwellers around, occupied a unique and distinct position in the Spartan social hierarchy. They were a free, non-citizen class who lived in their own communities along the coast and in the mountainous regions of Laconia and Messenia. Unlike the Helots, they were not state-owned serfs. They possessed their own local governments and were free to engage in trade, commerce, and skilled crafts, pursuits that were strictly forbidden to the Spartiate citizens. The Perioeci were the artisans, merchants, and mariners of the Spartan state. They produced the bronze and iron weapons, the leather armor, the textiles, and the pottery that the Spartiates required, but were forbidden to create themselves. They were the economic backbone of Sparta, generating the goods and wealth necessary to support the military elite. Despite their freedom from serfdom, the Perioeci were not politically equal to the Spartiates. They could not vote in the Spartan assembly, nor could they hold public office. They were, however, required to serve in the Spartan army as hoplites, fighting alongside the Spartiates in a separate division. They were a crucial part of the Spartan military machine, and their loyalty was generally high, as they were often treated with more respect than the Helots and had a vested interest in the stability of the Spartan state. The Perioeci's role as a buffer class was vital to Sparta's existence. They were the intermediary between the feared Helot population and the insular Spartiate community. Their labor and skills filled the economic vacuum created by the Spartiates' dedication to war, making the entire system viable. This social stratification, with its three distinct classes, was a hallmark of the Spartan system. It was an intricate social and economic machine, with the Perioeci managing the complex world of trade and craft, the Helots providing the agricultural foundation, and the Spartiates serving as the disciplined, martial elite. This system, for all its unique rigidity and the stark inequalities it contained, was the very engine that powered Sparta's rise to prominence in the Greek world. It was a societal structure designed not for comfort or intellectual growth, but for the singular purpose of military dominance. The unique social and political structure of Sparta, with its singular focus on military excellence and internal stability, made it a natural leader among the city-states of the Peloponnese. In the 6th century BC, this leadership coalesced into a formal military alliance known as the Peloponnesian League. This league was not a hegemonic empire like the Athenian one that would follow. Instead, it was a collective security pact, a voluntary military coalition of city-states united by shared interests and a common fear of external threats. The formation of the League was driven primarily by Sparta's desire to secure its borders and manage its relationships with its neighbours, particularly its long-standing rival, Argos. The Argives, a powerful city-state to the north, had a history of challenging Spartan authority in the Peloponnese. By forging alliances with cities like Tegea, Corinth, and Elis, Sparta created a network of allies that could check Argive power and provide a buffer against threats from other regions of Greece. This strategy of collective defense was a key component of Sparta's non-imperialistic foreign policy, as it sought to maintain the balance of power without the need for territorial expansion. The structure of the Peloponnesian League was simple but effective. There was no overarching bureaucracy, no central treasury, and no mandatory tribute system. Instead, the League was organized as a dual assembly system. The first assembly, the Congress of the League, was comprised of representatives from all member states, each with one vote. This democratic structure gave every city, regardless of size, a voice in military and political decisions. The second assembly was the Spartan ecclesia, or citizen assembly, which had the power to vote on whether or not to support a motion put forward by the League's Congress. This gave Sparta a crucial veto power over all League decisions, ensuring that it would not be compelled to go to war against its will. The obligations of the member states were straightforward. They were to provide military forces when summoned by Sparta. The League's strength lay in its combined military power. While Sparta's army was the core of the land forces, its allies provided additional hoplites and cavalry, creating a formidable force that was unrivaled in Greece. Corinth, with its strong navy, provided crucial naval support, making the League a force to be reckoned with on both land and sea. This flexible and voluntary arrangement made the League highly attractive to other city-states that were wary of Athens' growing imperial ambitions. The Peloponnesian League served as a testament to Sparta's diplomatic skill and its ability to lead without resorting to the kind of direct rule that defined the Athenian Empire. It was a model of a voluntary military coalition, a testament to the respect Sparta's military reputation commanded. The League's shared political culture, which favoured oligarchic and aristocratic forms of government, also served as a counterpoint to the democratic ideals of Athens. For decades, the League maintained peace and stability in the Peloponnese, securing Sparta's position as the leading military power in Greece and setting the stage for the ideological and political clash with Athens that was to come. Its success was a direct result of its non-coercive nature, a stark contrast to the empire building that was emerging elsewhere. The life of a Spartiate citizen was a unique and highly regimented existence, defined from birth by the principles of austerity and communal living. This way of life was not a matter of personal choice, but a constitutional requirement, a deliberate social construct designed to reinforce military discipline and social cohesion. After completing the rigorous agoge, the young Spartiate was expected to live a life of simple means, a direct consequence of the Lycurgan reforms, which scorned personal wealth and discouraged the accumulation of private possessions. A core component of this communal existence was the syssitia, the mandatory common mess. Upon reaching adulthood at the age of 20, a Spartan male had to be accepted into one of these dining groups, each consisting of approximately 15 to 20 men. This acceptance was not guaranteed. A unanimous vote from all members was required. Rejection meant a man was effectively excluded from the citizen body and its privileges. This rigorous process ensured that only those who were fully committed to the Spartan way of life could become full citizens. The syssitia was far more than a place to eat. It was the social heart of the Spartan system. All men were required to contribute a fixed amount of food and drink each month, including barley, wine, cheese, and figs. This standardized contribution ensured that no man could ostentatiously display his wealth or lack thereof. The meals themselves were simple and frugal, with the most famous dish being melazomos, or black broth, a concoction of boiled pork, blood, and spices that was notoriously unappetizing to outsiders, but was a staple of the Spartan diet. This shared simplicity reinforced a sense of equality and brotherhood among the men, forging bonds that were unbreakable on the battlefield. The communal lifestyle of the Spartiate extended beyond the dining hall. Spartan men lived in barracks until the age of 30, even after marriage. Their lives were dedicated to physical training, military exercises, and war games. The state provided a narrow path for their existence, with all other pursuits, from the arts to philosophy and commerce, actively discouraged. This singular focus was a calculated effort to create an entire class of professional soldiers, men who were hardened and disciplined to a degree unmatched in the ancient world. They were not merely citizen soldiers, but full-time warriors, a standing army in a society of city-states that relied on citizen militias. This austere lifestyle also served a political function. By minimizing personal property and discouraging luxury, the system aimed to eliminate the social and economic rivalries that plagued other Greek city-states. The Spartans believed that a society free from the corrupting influence of wealth would be more stable and unified. The result was a culture that valued deeds over words, discipline over comfort, and the collective good above individual ambition. The Spartan way of life was, in essence, a living monument to the state's primary goal: to maintain social order and military superiority at any cost. It was a rigorous, communal, and profoundly disciplined existence, a direct and uncompromising result of the unique circumstances that had given birth to the Spartan state. The unique societal structure of Sparta, while rigorously restricting the lives of men, afforded women a level of freedom and influence that was exceptional in the ancient Greek world. This was not a consequence of an abstract commitment to gender equality, but a pragmatic result of the Spartan system's singular focus on military excellence. With male citizens dedicated to the agogo, communal messes, and life in the barracks, women were tasked with the responsibilities that in other city-states were typically handled by men. This created a profound division of labor and a surprising degree of autonomy for Spartan women. Spartan girls, unlike their counterparts in Athens, were subject to a state-sponsored education and physical training regimen. While not as brutal as the agoge for boys, this system was designed to produce strong, healthy women who could bear equally strong children. They were taught to run, wrestle, and throw the javelin, often competing in athletic contests alongside men. This emphasis on physical fitness was a radical departure from the Greek norm, where women's lives were largely confined to the domestic sphere. The result was a class of women who were physically robust and independent, a direct product of the state's eugenic and militaristic goals. The absence of men from the household for extended periods meant that Spartan women were the de facto managers of the family estates. They controlled their own properties, oversaw the helot labor force, and managed the finances of their households. This was a direct result of Spartan legal tradition which allowed women to inherit land. As a result, Spartan women came to own a significant portion of the city-state's wealth. By the 4th century BC, it is estimated that women owned as much as 2/5 of all Spartan land. This economic power gave them a considerable degree of influence in a society that, for men, outwardly scorned the acquisition of personal wealth. Spartan women also played a crucial and respected role in society as wives and mothers. Their primary function was to produce healthy male heirs for the state. They were revered as the bearers of the next generation of warriors, and their status was directly tied to the sons they produced. Unlike the women of Athens, who were expected to be demure and withdrawn from public life, Spartan women were known for their boldness and outspokenness. They were educated and, as a result, were a part of the city's intellectual and political conversations in a way that was unheard of elsewhere. The freedom of Spartan women was, therefore, an integral part of the Spartan system, a unique byproduct of its institutionalized militarism. It was a liberation born not of philosophical ideals, but of a practical necessity. The Spartan man, a living instrument of the state, was free to pursue his military duties because his wife was fully capable of managing the family estate and raising the next generation of warriors. This symbiotic relationship, with women managing the domestic and economic affairs and men dedicated to the military, created a society that was both rigid in its martial focus and unusually liberated in its gender roles. The Spartan woman, with her physical prowess, economic power, and social influence, stood in stark contrast to her Greek counterparts, a living testament to the unique and paradoxical nature of the Spartan state. The period following the Second Messenian War saw Sparta consolidate its position as a military power, but this regional dominance was soon to be challenged by a threat of unprecedented scale. The Persian Empire, a vast and highly centralized force, extended its dominion from Asia Minor and the Near East, its expansion bringing it into direct contact with the independent city-states of mainland Greece. The Ionian Revolt of 499–493 BC, which saw Greek cities in Persian-controlled Anatolia rise up against their rulers with support from Athens, served as the primary catalyst for the conflict. The Persian king Darius I viewed Athenian support for the rebels as a direct challenge to his authority, and resolved to punish the Greek city-states for their insolence. The first Persian invasion in 490 BC ended in a decisive defeat for Persian forces at the Battle of Marathon. However, this was merely a preliminary to a much larger conflict. A decade later, Darius's son, Xerxes I, amassed a massive invasion force, a combined naval and land army that dwarfed any military expedition ever seen. The scale of the Persian preparations was immense, involving the construction of a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont and the excavation of a canal through the Isthmus of Mount Athos to facilitate the passage of the fleet. The goal was nothing less than the total subjugation of the Greek mainland. Facing a threat of this magnitude, the Greek city-states were forced to put aside their rivalries and form a defensive alliance. The Hellenic League, a coalition of approximately 31 city-states, convened in 481 BC. Given its reputation for military excellence and its leadership of the Peloponnesian League, Sparta was unanimously chosen to command the combined land forces of Greece. This role placed Sparta at the center of the strategic planning for the defense of the entire Greek world, a position that tested its singular military focus on a scale it had never before faced. The military and political strategy adopted by the Hellenic League was multifaceted. The plan involved using Greece's difficult terrain to their advantage, leveraging narrow passes and coastlines to negate the Persian forces' overwhelming numerical superiority. Naval battles would be fought in confined straits, where the heavier Greek ships could outmaneuver the larger Persian fleet. On land, the strategy was to hold a narrow pass that would funnel the Persian army into a confined space, a tactic that relied on the discipline and fighting prowess of the Greek hoplite. Sparta's primary role was to provide the core of the land army and to command the entire Hellenic defense. Their military discipline and legendary training were viewed as the final bulwark against the Persian invasion. The Persian Wars, therefore, were not just a military conflict, but a confrontation between two entirely different ways of life. The vast, autocratic, and multi-ethnic Persian Empire against the fiercely independent, self-governing city-states of Greece. The conflict tested every aspect of the Spartan system, its military training, its leadership structure, and its ability to act on a global stage. The stakes were nothing less than the preservation of their independence, and, as many Greeks believed, the survival of their culture. The stage was set for a series of battles that would determine the fate of Greece, and Sparta, with its unmatched army, was poised to play the central role. The military preparations of the Hellenic League culminated in a bold strategic decision to defend a narrow pass in northern Greece known as Thermopylae. This position, located between a steep mountainside and the sea, was a natural choke point that could negate the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Persian army. The Greek strategy was to hold this pass for as long as possible, a tactic that would buy time for the southern Greek city-states to muster their full forces and to prepare for a larger conflict. This crucial task was entrusted to a small contingent of soldiers led by the Spartan king, Leonidas. His force was not the full Spartan army, which was delayed by the religious festival of the Carneia, but a small, hand-picked force of 300 Spartiates. This core group was augmented by several thousand allied soldiers from other Greek city-states, including Thespians and Thebans, bringing the total defending force to an estimated 70 men. The Persian army, commanded by King Xerxes I, arrived at Thermopylae in the summer of 480 BC. Xerxes, confident in his overwhelming numbers, initially expected the Greeks to retreat. When they did not, he launched a series of assaults on the Greek position. The Persian infantry, a mix of lightly armored troops and spearmen, were funneled into the narrow pass, where they were met by the disciplined Greek phalanx. The Spartan hoplites, with their bronze armor, large shields, and long spears, were a formidable defensive line. Their training and unit cohesion were superior to the Persian forces, allowing them to hold the pass against wave after wave of frontal assault. The first 2 days of the battle were a tactical stalemate. The Greek forces, utilizing their superior equipment and a relentless rotation of units, inflicted heavy casualties on the Persian army. Xerxes' elite infantry, including his famed immortals, were unable to break through the Greek line. The Persian king's frustration mounted as his massive army was held at bay by a comparatively small force. The situation changed on the third day when a local man, Ephialtes, betrayed the Greeks and revealed the existence of a mountain path that allowed the Persians to bypass the main pass and outflank the Greek defenders. Upon learning of the betrayal, Leonidas made a critical strategic decision. He ordered the majority of the Greek forces to retreat, an action that would save their lives to fight another day. Leonidas himself, however, stayed behind with his 300 Spartiates and a contingent of Thespians and Thebans. Their stand was not a suicidal act of futility, but a deliberate and calculated sacrifice to protect the retreating army and to delay the Persian advance for a crucial period of time. Surrounded on both sides, the remaining Greek forces fought to the last man. The final phase of the battle saw the Spartans and their allies abandon the pass and take a final stand on a small hill, where they were surrounded and overwhelmed. While a military defeat, the Battle of Thermopylae was a monumental moral victory for the Greeks. The sacrifice of Leonidas and his men bought time for the main Greek forces to prepare and served as a powerful symbol of Hellenic resistance. It demonstrated that the Persians were not invincible and that Greek discipline and courage could stand against overwhelming numbers. The battle's legacy, immortalized by historians, became the ultimate example of Spartan military virtue and an enduring symbol of courage in the face of impossible odds. The sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought the Greek city-states valuable time, but the Persian invasion force had advanced into southern Greece, burning Athens and devastating the Attic countryside. The war was far from over. The final decisive land battle of the Persian wars would take place on the plain of Plataea in Boeotia. For this confrontation, the Hellenic League, now fully mobilized, assembled the largest Greek army in its history. The command of this combined force fell to the Spartan regent Pausanias. The army consisted of nearly 40 heavily armed hoplites, with the Spartan contingent alone numbering 10 men, a force that included 5 Spartiates and 5 Perioeci. This was the largest hoplite force Sparta ever fielded outside of its own territory. The Persian commander, Mardonius, led a massive army of his own, comprised of Persian infantry and cavalry, as well as contingents from Greek city-states that had sided with the invaders. The two armies faced each other for days, a tense standoff on the open plain. Both commanders were hesitant to commit to a full assault, each waiting for a tactical advantage. The Persians, with their superior cavalry, constantly harassed the Greek flanks and supply lines. This strategy was designed to force the Greeks to break formation and engage in a disorganized battle on the open plain, where the Persian cavalry could prove decisive. Pausanias, however, maintained a defensive posture, keeping his forces on a series of low ridges that offered protection from the cavalry. The Spartan strategy was a testament to their discipline, to maintain a cohesive phalanx and to wait for the opportune moment to strike. The stalemate was broken when Mardonius, frustrated by the lack of progress and seeking to seize the initiative, launched a full-scale assault. The battle itself was a tactical masterpiece for the Greeks. The Spartan contingent, forming the core of the right flank, faced the elite Persian infantry. The fighting was fierce and protracted, with the two armies locked in a brutal contest of strength and endurance. The Spartan phalanx, with its superior armor, longer spears, and unparalleled unit cohesion, proved to be an unstoppable force. The Persians, armed with shorter spears and wicker shields, were unable to withstand the relentless push of the Spartan shield wall. Pausanias, leading his men from the front, directed the battle with a calm determination that inspired his troops. The disciplined Spartan advance shattered the Persian line, causing it to collapse in disarray. The death of Mardonius in the thick of the fighting sealed the Persian defeat. The loss of their commander demoralized the remaining Persian forces, and the entire army broke and fled. The Greek allies, seeing the Spartan breakthrough, joined the pursuit, turning the Persian retreat into a full-scale rout. The Battle of Plataea was a comprehensive victory for the Greeks. It secured the final defeat of the Persian land invasion and put an end to the direct Persian military threat to mainland Greece. For Sparta, the victory at Plataea was a crowning achievement. It solidified their reputation as the supreme military power on land and established them as the undisputed leader of the Hellenic League. The battle was a definitive validation of the Spartan way of life and its unparalleled focus on martial excellence. The decisive victory at Plataea effectively ended the Persian threat to mainland Greece, but it did not bring lasting peace. Instead, the shared triumph created the conditions for a new and profound rivalry between the two leading powers of the Hellenic League, Sparta and Athens. The period that followed, known to historians as the Pentacontitetia, or the 50-year period, was a time of rising tension, a cold war of diplomatic maneuvering, political clashes, and proxy conflicts that would eventually erupt into a full-scale war. The primary source of this tension was the fundamental philosophical and political differences between the two city-states. Sparta, with its oligarchic government and land-based military, represented a conservative, traditional way of life. It was a power that valued stability, discipline, and insular self-sufficiency. Athens, on the other hand, had emerged from the Persian Wars as a vibrant naval power with a radical new form of government, democracy. It was an imperial force that relied on trade, maritime power, and a vast network of subject states known as the Delian League. This philosophical clash between land and sea, oligarchy and democracy, tradition and progress, made a future conflict almost inevitable. The initial phase of the rivalry was characterized by a series of minor skirmishes and diplomatic standoffs. After the Persian Wars, Athens began to rebuild its city walls with an unprecedented speed, a move that Sparta viewed with suspicion. Spartan envoys, concerned about Athens's growing power, urged them to stop, but the Athenians, led by Themistocles, used diplomatic maneuvering and subterfuge to complete the fortifications. This incident was a clear sign that the two former allies were no longer operating on a basis of mutual trust. The rivalry escalated with the Delian League, which Athens transformed from a voluntary anti-Persian alliance into a coercive empire. Member states were required to pay tribute and were subject to Athenian authority, a stark contrast to the more voluntary structure of the Peloponnesian League. Sparta watched this expansion with growing alarm, viewing Athenian imperialism as a direct threat to the balance of power in Greece. The clashes were often ideological as much as they were territorial, with Athens supporting democratic factions in other city-states, while Sparta backed oligarchic governments. The Pentacontitetia was also marked by several direct military clashes, though none amounted to a full-scale war. The First Peloponnesian War, a conflict lasting from 460 to 445 BC, was a series of proxy wars and limited engagements fought primarily by Athens against Corinth and Aegina, both Spartan allies. Sparta's involvement was sporadic and reluctant, as it was still preoccupied with internal helot revolts. A 5-year truce in 451 BC, followed by a 30-year peace treaty in 446 BC, temporarily halted the hostilities. However, the underlying tensions remained. The Athenian Empire continued to grow, and Sparta became increasingly convinced that it could not tolerate its rivals' unbridled expansion. The period ended with a clear understanding on both sides that their political and ideological differences were irreconcilable, and that a final confrontation was only a matter of time. The Pentacontitetia was a long, cold prelude to the Great War that would ultimately define the fate of classical Greece. The long, simmering tensions between Sparta and Athens finally erupted into open conflict in 431 BC, marking the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. This massive conflict, which would engulf the Greek world for nearly 3 decades, is traditionally divided into 3 distinct phases. The first of these, the Archidamian War, is named after the Spartan king Archidamus II, who commanded the Peloponnesian forces in its initial years. This phase was defined by the clashing of 2 fundamentally different military strategies: Sparta's land-based power against Athens's naval supremacy. Sparta's strategy, a straightforward application of its military doctrine, was to invade Attica, the territory surrounding Athens, with its army of hoplites and allied forces. King Archidamus II led this invasion in the spring of 431 BC, and for the next several years, the Peloponnesian army would annually march into Attic territory, ravaging the countryside, destroying crops, and uprooting olive groves. The goal of this scorched earth tactic was to force the Athenians to abandon their secure city walls and engage the Spartan phalanx in a decisive land battle. Sparta, confident in its army's superiority on land, believed that a single overwhelming victory would end the war swiftly. Athens, however, under the strategic guidance of its leader Pericles, adopted a counter-strategy that neutralized Sparta's primary weapon. The Athenians, protected by their formidable long walls that connected the city to its port at Piraeus, implemented a defensive policy. Pericles ordered the population of Attica to abandon their farms and retreat within the safety of the walls, where they would be supplied by sea. This strategy was predicated on Athens's unparalleled naval power. While Spartan hoplites could destroy the Attic countryside, they could not breach the city's fortifications, nor could they cut off its access to the sea. The Athenian navy, meanwhile, was free to conduct raids on the Peloponnesian coast, harass Spartan allies, and disrupt their trade routes. The Archidamian War thus became a long and frustrating war of attrition. For Sparta, the annual invasions, while devastating to the Athenian economy, failed to achieve their primary objective of a decisive battle. The Athenians, for their part, endured the destruction of their land but remained unassailable behind their walls. The war was a stalemate, with neither side able to inflict a knockout blow on the other. This phase of the conflict was also marked by a catastrophic event within Athens. A plague, brought in by the ships and exacerbated by the cramped conditions within the city walls, decimated the Athenian population. It killed Pericles himself and a significant portion of the citizenry, a calamity that severely weakened Athens but still did not force them to surrender. The Archidamian War finally came to an end in 421 BC with the signing of the Peace of Nicias, a truce that was intended to last for 50 years. The war had proven that Sparta could not defeat Athens on land, and Athens could not defeat Sparta at sea. The conflict's first phase ended in a stalemate, a testament to the fact that two military superpowers, each supreme in its own domain, could not easily find a way to resolve their differences through conventional warfare. The peace, however, was a fragile one, and the underlying tensions between the two powers were not resolved, setting the stage for the next, more brutal phase of the conflict. The strategic stalemate of the Archidamian War was shattered by an event that was both a military victory for Athens and a profound psychological shock to the Spartan state. In 425 BC, a naval skirmish between Athenian and Spartan forces led to a small contingent of Spartiate hoplites becoming trapped on a small island off the coast of Messenia known as Sphacteria. This was not a large force, consisting of only about 420 men, but their capture was a military and ideological catastrophe for Sparta. At the heart of this contingent were 120 full-blooded Spartiates, members of the elite citizen class whose lives were considered invaluable to the state. The Spartan expectation, a core tenet of their martial philosophy, was that a Spartiate would either win in battle or die fighting. The very notion of a Spartan surrendering was unthinkable. The Athenian commander, Demosthenes, and the politician Cleon recognized the immense leverage this situation provided. They established a siege, blockading the island with their fleet to prevent any Spartan rescue attempts. The Spartans, for their part, were so desperate to save their men that they immediately sought a truce. They dispatched envoys to Athens offering to cede their territorial gains and negotiate a comprehensive peace. The Athenian assembly, buoyed by the prospect of a total victory, rejected the offer, believing that a complete Spartan surrender was within their grasp. The siege of Sphacteria was a protracted and challenging affair. The Spartan hoplites, though cut off and out of their element, put up a fierce resistance, utilizing the island's difficult terrain and rocky hills to their advantage. They repelled several Athenian landing attempts, inflicting casualties on the attacking forces. However, their position was untenable. Without a consistent supply of food or water, Their endurance was tested to the breaking point. The Athenian strategy of a patient blockade, rather than a risky frontal assault, proved to be effective. The siege came to an end after 72 days, when a new Athenian assault, utilizing lightly armed troops and archers, finally overwhelmed the starving Spartan garrison. The subsequent capture of the Spartiates was an unprecedented event. When the Athenian forces, with their light troops, were able to bypass the Spartan line and surround them, the Spartans, facing a situation where further resistance was futile, laid down their arms. The surrender was a shocking departure from their code, a public and humiliating act that sent a wave of disbelief across the Greek world. The captured Spartiates were taken back to Athens as prisoners, a tangible symbol of Sparta's vulnerability. Their capture gave Athens a powerful bargaining chip and severely damaged the myth of Spartan invincibility. For Sparta, the loss was a double blow. They had not only lost a significant number of their elite citizens, but their core philosophy of victory or death had been publicly shattered. The disaster at Sphacteria, therefore, had far-reaching consequences. It forced Sparta to the negotiating table, where they were compelled to sign the Peace of Nicias in 421 BC to secure the return of their captured men. This treaty, while bringing a temporary halt to the war, was a direct result of a military and psychological defeat that Sparta could not afford to repeat. The surrender at Sphacteria was a stark reminder of the limitations of a land-based military power in a world dominated by naval warfare. It was a moment that redefined the nature of the Peloponnesian War and set the stage for its more brutal final phase. The Peace of Nicias, signed in 421 BC, was a short-lived and ineffective treaty. It brought a temporary halt to the war, but failed to address the deep-seated mistrust and rivalry between Sparta and Athens. Hostilities resumed, and the conflict entered its third and most brutal phase, the Decelean War. This phase was marked by a fundamental shift in Spartan strategy, from a policy of annual invasions to a permanent, year-round occupation of Attic territory. This new approach was a direct result of the counsel provided by the Athenian statesman and general Alcibiades, who, having been exiled from Athens, defected to Sparta. Alcibiades, with his intimate knowledge of Athenian vulnerabilities, convinced the Spartans to abandon their old strategy of seasonal raids. He urged them to establish a permanent fortified base at Deceleia, a high point in Attica, situated approximately 14 miles north of Athens. This location was strategically chosen. From their fort at Deceleia, the Spartans could effectively cut off Athens's land-based supplies and, more importantly, disrupt the city's access to the silver mines at Laurion, which were a vital source of Athenian imperial revenue. The occupation of Deceleia was a game-changer. It transformed the war from a series of intermittent campaigns into a constant siege. The Decelean War was a long and grueling conflict of attrition. For Athens, the permanent Spartan presence at Deceleia was a catastrophic blow. It forced the entire rural population of Attica to abandon their farms and reside permanently within the city walls, putting a strain on the city's resources and sanitation. The Spartans were now free to systematically devastate the Attic countryside year-round, ensuring that Athens's agricultural base was completely destroyed. The city's access to its overland supply routes was severed, and all goods had to be brought in by sea, a more expensive and time-consuming process. The economic and psychological toll on the Athenians was immense. For Sparta, the Decelean War was a testament to its newfound strategic flexibility. The Spartans, traditionally slow to adapt, had embraced a new, more aggressive approach. Their occupation of Deceleia was a radical departure from their conventional military doctrine and showed a willingness to learn from their mistakes. The fort at Deceleia became a permanent base of operations, where a Spartan garrison, augmented by allied forces, could launch raids at will and keep Athens under a state of perpetual pressure. This constant threat of attack forced Athens to commit its entire male citizen body to military duty, a strain that eventually wore down the city's military and financial reserves. The Decelean War also witnessed the expansion of the conflict into a new and crucial theatre, the Aegean Sea. Alcibiades also advised the Spartans to build a navy to challenge Athenian naval supremacy. With funding from the Persian Empire, which saw an opportunity to weaken Athens, Sparta began to construct a fleet. This marked a profound shift in the conflict. The war was no longer a simple clash between a land power and a sea power. It was a struggle for naval dominance. The Decelean War, therefore, was a period of unceasing conflict that exhausted both sides. It was a brutal, total war that brought Greece to the brink of collapse, setting the stage for the final decisive confrontation. The brutal, prolonged conflict of the Decelean War had exhausted both Athens and Sparta, but the final, decisive confrontation was yet to come. The struggle, now a naval one, was decided by the actions of a single man, the Spartan admiral Lysander. A brilliant and ambitious commander, Lysander understood that Athens, despite its weakened state, was still a formidable naval power and could not be defeated on land. His strategy was to challenge Athenian supremacy on the seas, a theatre of war where Sparta had traditionally been at a disadvantage. His plan was made possible by a crucial infusion of financial support from the Persian Empire, which, under the leadership of Cyrus the Younger, provided the resources necessary for Sparta to build a new fleet. Lysander's naval command was a testament to his tactical genius. He was not a naval expert by birth, but learned quickly, utilizing Persian gold to construct a new fleet of triremes and to pay for the recruitment and training of rowers and sailors. His first major success came with the capture of Lampsacus and the siege of the Athenian-controlled city of Sestos. These victories gave him control of the Hellespont, the vital waterway that connected the Black Sea, Athens' primary source of grain, to the Aegean. This move was a direct threat to the very lifeblood of Athens, as it could now starve the city into submission. The Athenian navy, under the command of a group of generals, sailed to the Hellespont to confront Lysander's fleet. The two navies faced each other across a narrow strait, a tense standoff lasting for 5 days. The Athenian fleet, consisting of 180 triremes, was stationed at a beach near the city of Sestos, known as Aegospotami, or Goat's River. The Athenians, complacent in their perceived naval superiority, did not maintain a state of full battle readiness. Their sailors would often disembark to forage for food, leaving their ships vulnerable to a sudden attack. Lysander, with his characteristic cunning, exploited this complacency. For 4 days, he would sail his fleet out into the strait, feigning a readiness for battle. The Athenians would respond in kind, preparing their ships for a fight that never came. On the 5th day, however, Lysander waited until the Athenian crews had dispersed to forage and then launched a surprise attack. He sailed his fleet across the strait, finding the Athenian ships largely undefended and their crews scattered. The result was a catastrophic and one-sided naval battle. The Battle of Aegospotami was a total annihilation of the Athenian navy. With their crews unable to man the ships in time, the Athenian fleet was caught completely by surprise. Lysander captured 160 Athenian triremes, with only a handful of ships escaping. The remaining Athenian sailors and generals were captured and summarily executed. This single battle, which lasted only a few hours, effectively ended the Peloponnesian War. The loss of its fleet meant that Athens could no longer import grain, its lifeline to the outside world. With its food supply cut off, the city was faced with a stark choice between surrender and starvation. A few months later, Lysander blockaded the port of Piraeus, and Athens, a once proud imperial power, was forced to surrender unconditionally. The terms of the surrender were harsh. The long walls, the very symbol of Athenian defiance, were torn down to the sound of music. The Athenian navy was reduced to a mere 12 ships, and the city was forced to accept an oligarchic government known as the 30 Tyrants, a regime installed and supported by Sparta. The war, which had begun a generation earlier, ended not with a single land battle but with a decisive naval victory that proved to be the final fatal blow to Athenian power. Sparta, with the help of Persian gold and the cunning of its admiral, had finally triumphed. The unconditional surrender of Athens in 404 BC marked the end of the Peloponnesian War and the beginning of a new era of Spartan supremacy. For a brief period, Sparta stood as the undisputed hegemon of the Greek world, its military might and its reputation for discipline earning it a position of unparalleled authority. The victory, however, was a complicated one. It had been achieved not through the traditional Spartan methods of land warfare, but through a long and arduous naval campaign, a theatre of conflict for which Sparta was ill-suited. This victory forced Sparta to confront a new and profound reality. Its insular land-based system was now responsible for governing a sprawling, naval-dependent empire. The consequences of this victory were immediate. The Peloponnesian League, which had once been a loose confederation of allies, was now a network of subordinate states under Spartan control. Sparta dissolved the Athenian Empire and installed oligarchic governments, known as dikarchies, in the cities that had been loyal to Athens. These regimes were often supported by a Spartan garrison, a tangible symbol of Spartan control. This policy was a radical departure from Sparta's traditional non-imperialistic foreign policy. It was a strategy of direct rule that was at odds with its own constitutional principles and its history of leading through consent rather than coercion. The challenges of governing this new empire were immense and soon became apparent. The Spartan state, with its small citizen body and its anti-materialistic ethos, lacked the administrative experience and the bureaucratic infrastructure to manage a vast network of subject states. The Spartan governors, often men who had spent their lives in military training and communal living, were ill-equipped for the complexities of imperial administration, taxation, and diplomacy. This administrative vacuum led to widespread corruption and mismanagement, as Spartan officials, unaccustomed to wealth and power, often abused their authority. Furthermore, Sparta's supremacy created resentment among its former allies. The Peloponnesian League members, who had fought for decades to liberate themselves from Athenian imperialism, now found themselves under a new, equally demanding master. The city-states that had once viewed Sparta as a liberator now saw it as a tyrannical overlord. Corinth and Thebes, two of Sparta's most important allies during the war, were particularly resentful. They had borne the brunt of the land war and now felt that their contributions were not adequately rewarded. This discontent would eventually lead to a series of rebellions and the formation of a new anti-Spartan coalition. The moral and philosophical challenges of empire also took their toll on the Spartan state. The influx of wealth and luxury from the conquered territories, particularly from Athens, began to erode the very austerity that defined the Spartan way of life. The Lycurgan reforms, which had been so effective in forging a disciplined army, were not equipped to handle the corrupting influence of foreign wealth. The Spartan kings and magistrates, men who had been raised to scorn personal gain, now found themselves in a position to acquire immense riches, a temptation that proved to be too great for many to resist. The once rigid social fabric of Sparta began to fray as a new class of wealthy citizens, often generals who had acquired fortunes abroad, began to challenge the traditional equality of the Spartiates. The victory over Athens was a glorious military triumph, but it was also a political and social challenge that Sparta was not prepared to meet. It was an empire built on the ideals of an insular city-state, and the clash between these two realities would ultimately prove to be the undoing of Spartan supremacy. Following the victory at Aegospotami and the surrender of Athens, the Spartan admiral Lysander emerged as the single most powerful and influential figure in the Greek world. His military successes and his diplomatic skill had not only won the war for Sparta, but had also given him a level of personal prestige and authority that was unprecedented for a Spartiate. This was a direct challenge to the insular, collective nature of the Spartan state. His rise to prominence and his subsequent use of that power would be a defining element of the new era of Spartan supremacy, and a cautionary tale about the incompatibility of individual ambition with a society built on the rejection of personal glory. Upon the surrender of Athens, Lysander was tasked with reorganizing the new Spartangent-controlled territories. He did so by installing a system of government known as a dikarchy, a council of 10 men, in the city-states that had once belonged to the Athenian Empire. These councils, comprised of pro-Spartan oligarchs, were overseen by a Spartan garrison commander known as a harmost. This was a policy of direct and coercive control, a stark contrast to the more voluntary structure of the Peloponnesian League. Lysander's most famous act was the installation of the 30 tyrants in Athens, a brutal oligarchic regime that executed its opponents and confiscated their property. This ruthless approach to governance was a departure from traditional Spartan principles and was a direct consequence of Lysander's personal ambition and his desire to consolidate Spartan power. Lysander's power extended far beyond military command. He became a de facto ruler of a vast network of subject states, a personal empire that operated outside the traditional Spartan political framework. He was revered as a hero in the cities he had liberated, and was the recipient of extravagant honors, including having altars erected in his name. This personal adoration and the immense wealth he acquired through his conquests were a direct affront to the Spartan ethos of austerity and equality. His actions challenged the constitutional authority of the Spartan kings who, in accordance with the Retra, were forbidden from receiving such honors and were supposed to be the sole representatives of the state abroad. The Spartan establishment, and particularly the kings, grew deeply jealous and suspicious of Lysander's power. His actions were seen not as serving the state, but as serving his own ambition. They viewed the wealth and luxury he was bringing back to Sparta as a corrupting influence, a threat to the Lycurgan reforms. King Pausanias, in particular, was an outspoken critic of Lysander's policies, arguing that the Dicaches and the Harmosts were a tyrannical system that contradicted Sparta's traditional non-coercive approach to leadership. Lysander's political downfall was a direct result of this internal conflict. The Spartan kings, concerned about his growing influence and the erosion of their own authority, worked to undermine him. They eventually succeeded in having his system of Dicaches dismantled and the Harmosts recalled. He was stripped of his command, and his influence waned, but his personal prestige and wealth remained. His story is a powerful illustration of the profound contradictions that emerged in post-war Sparta. The state, which had been so successful in creating a military system, was not prepared to handle the realities of empire and the ambitions of a man who saw no reason to be constrained by a system that had been built for a simpler time. Lysander's ambition, a human trait that the Spartan system was engineered to suppress, had found a way to flourish, and in doing so, it exposed a fatal flaw in the very fabric of Spartan society. The brief period of Spartan supremacy following the Peloponnesian War was short-lived and turbulent. Sparta's aggressive and overbearing foreign policy, driven by a new imperial impulse, created a powerful backlash among its former allies. The installation of oligarchic governments, the presence of Spartan garrisons, and the imposition of a demanding tribute system alienated the very city-states that had helped Sparta achieve its victory. This resentment was particularly strong in Corinth and Thebes, two major powers of the Peloponnesian League that had contributed significantly to the war effort, but now felt that their contributions were not adequately rewarded. This discontent, combined with the growing political influence of Athens, led to the formation of a new anti-Spartan coalition. The Corinthian War, a conflict lasting from 395 to 387 BC, pitted this new coalition against Sparta. The alliance consisted of Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos, all of whom had their own grievances with Sparta's new imperial policies. Thebes, a traditional rival, was particularly incensed by Sparta's meddling in its internal politics and its support for a local rival. Corinth and Argos, meanwhile, were wary of Sparta's growing power and saw an opportunity to reassert their own influence in the Peloponnese. Athens, though still weakened from the Peloponnesian War, was a crucial member of the alliance. Its resurgent naval power and its diplomatic maneuvering provided a key counterpoint to Sparta's land-based military. The war was a complex and multifaceted conflict, fought on both land and sea. On land, the war was fought primarily in the Isthmus of Corinth and Boeotia. The Spartan army, while still highly disciplined and effective, faced a more organized and motivated opposition than it had in the Peloponnesian War. The Theban hoplites, in particular, proved to be a formidable force, utilizing new tactical innovations that challenged the traditional Spartan phalanx. The Battle of Haliartus in 395 BC, a minor but symbolically significant engagement, saw the death of the Spartan general Lysander, a sign that Sparta's military supremacy was no longer unquestioned. At sea, the war was a crucial test of Sparta's ability to maintain its naval dominance. Athens, with Persian financial support, rebuilt its fleet and challenged Spartan control of the Aegean. The war culminated in a major naval engagement off the coast of Cnidus in 394 BC, where the combined Athenian and Persian fleet, commanded by the Athenian admiral Conon, decisively defeated the Spartan navy. This defeat was a major blow to Spartan prestige and effectively ended its brief period of naval dominance. It also demonstrated the fragility of an empire built on the fleeting loyalty of subject states and the necessity of foreign funding. The Corinthian War was a brutal and inconclusive conflict that ended with the King's Peace, a treaty negotiated by the Persian king Artaxerxes II. This treaty was a major diplomatic victory for Persia, which reasserted its influence in the Greek world by dictating the terms of peace. For Sparta, the war was a humbling experience. It had lost its naval supremacy. Its military reputation had been damaged, and it had been forced to rely on the intervention of a foreign power to end a war it could not win. The war exposed the fatal flaws in Sparta's imperial ambitions and demonstrated that its insular land-based system was ill-equipped for the complexities of a multipolar world. The war did not end Spartan power, but it marked the beginning of its long and painful decline. The humbling outcome of the Corinthian War had exposed the fragility of Sparta's post-Peloponnesian War supremacy, but it did not immediately end its hegemonic ambitions. For over a decade following the King's Peace, Sparta continued to act as a dominant power, enforcing its will on Greek city-states and intervening in their internal affairs. However, this period of continued assertion was building toward a final, decisive confrontation. The moment of truth came in 371 BC on the plain of Leuctra, where Thebes, a former ally now a major rival, mounted a direct challenge to Spartan dominance. The battle that ensued would not only determine the fate of the two city-states, but would also fundamentally change the nature of Greek warfare. The conflict was a result of Thebes' refusal to sign a peace treaty that recognized Sparta's control over Boeotia. The Spartan army, commanded by King Cleombrotus I, marched into Boeotian territory, confident in its long-standing military superiority. The Theban forces, led by the brilliant general Epaminondas and his trusted companion Pelopidas, were outnumbered and faced an opponent that had not been decisively defeated on land for over a century. However, Epaminondas was a revolutionary thinker who understood that the traditional methods of warfare would not suffice against the disciplined Spartan phalanx. He devised a radical and innovative tactical plan. The conventional Greek battle formation was a phalanx, a block of hoplites that was typically 8 to 12 men deep. The right wing of the phalanx was considered the strongest, as it was anchored by the shields of its own men and the desire to protect one's exposed right side. Epaminondas, however, placed his Theban forces in an unprecedented formation. He deliberately weakened his right wing and instead massed his troops on his left, creating a massive, deep column of men, 50 ranks deep. This was a revolutionary military maneuver known as the oblique formation. The battle began with a clash of cavalry, but the true test came when the two main phalanxes engaged. Epaminondas's deep column struck directly at the elite Spartan right wing, which was traditionally the strongest part of the Spartan line. The sheer weight and momentum of the 50-man deep column, a massive battering ram of spears and shields, was an overwhelming force. The Spartan phalanx, designed for a more conventional, head-on clash, was unprepared for this concentrated assault on its flank. The pressure of the Theban column, combined with the momentum of the advance, shattered the Spartan line. The death of King Cleombrotus, in the thick of the fighting, sealed the Spartan defeat. The loss of their king, and the unprecedented collapse of their phalanx demoralized the army. The Spartan forces were overwhelmed and forced to retreat. The battle was a tactical masterclass for Epaminondas and a catastrophic defeat for Sparta. Over 1,000 Spartiates died in the battle, a significant portion of their already dwindling citizen body. More than a military loss, Leuctra was a profound psychological defeat. It shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility on land and demonstrated that their traditional, rigid military doctrine could be overcome by a flexible and innovative strategy. The battle marked the end of an era. Spartan hegemony in Greece was over, and the path was now clear for a new power to rise. The catastrophic defeat at Leuctra in 371 BC had not only shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility, but had also left the Spartan state militarily and politically vulnerable. The Theban victory, a direct result of Epaminondas's tactical genius, was a turning point in the history of classical Greece. Its most profound and lasting consequence was not a shift in military power, but a direct assault on the very foundation of the Spartan social and economic system. Emboldened by their victory and determined to permanently cripple their rival, the Thebans, under the command of Epaminondas, took a step that had been considered unthinkable for centuries. They invaded Spartan territory. The Laconian plain, a landscape previously considered inviolable, was now a theatre of war. The invasion was a masterclass in psychological and strategic warfare. Epaminondas did not merely seek to win a battle. He aimed to dismantle the Spartan state from the inside out. He marched his army, which included contingents from former Spartan allies, directly into Laconia, a move that sent a wave of panic through the Spartan populace. The Spartan army, with its citizen body severely depleted by the Battle of Leuctra, was unable to mount an effective defense. The Theban army, for the first time in history, laid waste to the Spartan countryside, destroying homes and farms. However, the most humiliating act of the invasion was yet to come. Epaminondas marched his army into Messenia, the very land whose conquest had been the bedrock of Spartan power for nearly 300 years. His arrival was a signal for a massive Helot uprising. The Messenian Helots, seeing an opportunity for freedom, rose in a full-scale revolt, joining forces with the Theban invaders against their Spartan masters. The liberation of the Helots was the final and most devastating blow to the Spartan state. Epaminondas, in an act of political genius, oversaw the re-establishment of an independent Messenian state. A new city, Messene, was founded on Mount Ithome, a location with symbolic importance as it had been a key center of resistance during the First Messenian War. This new city was fortified with massive stone walls and became the capital of a newly sovereign state. This action was more than a military victory. It was a constitutional and economic revolution. With the liberation of the Helots, Sparta's entire economic system, which was based on serfdom, collapsed. The land that had sustained the Spartiate citizenry for centuries was now free, and the source of their material sustenance was gone. The loss of Messenia and the Helot labor force was a catastrophe from which Sparta could never fully recover. The citizen body, already in decline due to the rigors of its lifestyle and losses in battle, could no longer be sustained. The kleros system, which had ensured a degree of equality among the Spartiates, was now rendered obsolete. The wealth of Sparta's most powerful families, derived from their landholdings, was severely diminished. The state's economic and military foundations had been irrevocably shattered. The invasion of Laconia and the liberation of the Helots was the final humiliating act of a war that had not only ended Spartan military supremacy, but had also brought about the irreversible decline of its unique way of life. The liberation of Messenia dealt a fatal blow to the Spartan state. With its economic foundation of Helot labor gone, the very existence of a professional citizen army was no longer sustainable. The Spartiates, accustomed to a life free from manual labor, were now faced with a stark new reality. The number of full citizens, which had been in a slow but steady decline for centuries due to war and the rigors of the agoge, now plummeted. This demographic crisis, a direct consequence of the loss of Messenia, was a catastrophe from which Sparta could never fully recover. The state, for all its vaunted military prowess, was now a hollow shell of its former self. In the decades that followed, Spartan policy became a desperate struggle to cling to the fading glory of the past. The reigns of kings and commanders from this period were characterized by a series of minor wars and political intrigues aimed at maintaining a facade of power while lacking the underlying resources to back it up. Sparta engaged in a series of conflicts with Thebes, but it was unable to decisively defeat its rival. Its attempts to regain control of Messenia were consistently repulsed by the fortified city of Messene and its new independent army. The Spartan state, which had once been the fear of all Greece, was now forced to fight a series of losing battles to preserve its honor. The loss of Messenia also had a profound impact on Spartan society. The kleros system, which had once ensured a degree of equality among the Spartiates, was now rendered obsolete. Wealthy families who had managed to maintain control of their lands in Laconia began to acquire the land of their poorer counterparts. This growing inequality, a direct contradiction of the Lycurgan reforms, created deep social divisions within the citizen body. The ideal of a perfectly egalitarian society, a cornerstone of the Spartan myth, was now replaced by a reality of a few wealthy elites and a growing number of impoverished citizens. The social fabric of Sparta, which had been so meticulously engineered to prevent such a division, began to unravel. Politically, Sparta became increasingly irrelevant on the larger Greek stage. It was no longer a military hegemon but a regional power, and a declining one at that. When a new power emerged in the north, the Kingdom of Macedon, Sparta was either unable or unwilling to join the major conflicts that would determine the future of Greece. When Philip II of Macedon unified the Greek city-states, Sparta alone refused to join his Hellenic League. This act was not a sign of strength, but of a profound inability to adapt to the new political realities of the 4th century BC. Its military system, designed for hoplite warfare, was ill-equipped to face the highly mobile and tactically flexible Macedonian phalanx. The decline of Sparta was a long and painful process, a slow and agonizing descent from its position of supremacy. The state that had once been the undisputed leader of the Greek world was now a shadow of its former self. Its military power was diminished, its citizen body was depleted, and its social system was fractured by growing inequality. Sparta was clinging to its traditions and its sense of superiority in a world that had moved on without it. This final stand was not a glorious last act, but a series of desperate struggles by a state that was unable to adapt to its own irreversible decline. The sun had set on Spartan power, and the darkness of its long, painful twilight had begun. The long, painful decline of Sparta was punctuated by two remarkable, though ultimately tragic, attempts to restore the state to its former glory. These efforts, led by two kings, Agis IV and Cleomenes III, were not a return to military conquest, but a radical effort to turn back the clock and restore the ancient Lycurgan constitution. They recognized that Sparta's weakness was not a result of military inferiority alone, but of a profound internal decay. Their reforms were a desperate, last-ditch effort to save a society that was crumbling from within. The first of these reformers was Agis IV, who ascended to the throne in 244 BC. He was a young king who was deeply concerned by the growing social and economic inequality that was fracturing the Spartan state. By his time, the Lycurgan ideal of equality among citizens had been completely abandoned. Land ownership had become concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, while the majority of Spartiates had been dispossessed of their plots and had lost their citizenship. The citizen body, which had once numbered in the thousands, had now dwindled to a few hundred. Agis proposed a radical program of reform that included the redistribution of land and the abolition of all debts. His goal was to replenish the citizen body by re-enfranchising the impoverished. This program, however, was met with fierce opposition from the wealthy elites, who saw their land and power threatened. Agis, despite having some support from his allies, was ultimately betrayed by a fellow king and executed in 241 BC. His attempt to reform the state from within had failed, and the social and economic problems of Sparta remained unaddressed. The second reformer, Cleomenes III, came to power a decade later in 235 BC. He was a more ruthless and effective leader than Agis. He recognized that reform could not be achieved through peaceful means and instead resolved to use force. Cleomenes, after securing a series of military victories abroad, returned to Sparta and launched a coup against the conservative ephors. He abolished their office, purged the old government, and exiled his political opponents. With his power now secure, he proceeded with a far more comprehensive program of reform than his predecessor. He redistributed land, as Agis had proposed, and he freed the remaining helots, a revolutionary act that was both a moral and a military decision. His goal was to replenish the citizen body by granting citizenship to the helots and the dispossessed, a move that would provide Sparta with a new large army. Cleomenes' reforms, while radical, were also a last-ditch effort to save a failing state. He was not a democrat, but an autocrat who used absolute power to enforce his vision of a restored Sparta. His actions, however, alarmed the other Greek city-states, who feared a resurgence of Spartan power. The Achaean League, led by the general Aratus, allied itself with Antigonus Doson, the king of Macedon. The final confrontation between Cleomenes' reformed Sparta and the combined forces of the Achaean League and Macedon took place at the Battle of Silesia in 222 BC. Cleomenes, though a brilliant tactician, was heavily outnumbered and was decisively defeated. He was forced to flee to Egypt, where he would eventually take his own life. His death marked the final tragic end of any hope for a restored independent Sparta. The failure of both Agis and Cleomenes demonstrated that Sparta's decline was not merely a political or social problem, but an irreversible historical process. The state was a relic of a bygone era, and no amount of radical reform could save it from its inevitable fate. The desperate reforms of King Cleomenes III, while successful in revitalizing a dying Spartan state, ultimately served to provoke a final catastrophic confrontation with the dominant powers of the Hellenistic world. His program of land redistribution and political purges, intended to restore the ancient martial traditions, was viewed with profound alarm by his neighbors. The Achaean League, a federation of city-states led by the general Aratus of Sicyon, saw Cleomenes' resurgent power as a direct threat to its own regional hegemony. To counter this, Aratus allied the League with an even greater power, the Macedonian Antigonid dynasty, commanded by its king, Antigonus Doson. The stage was set for a battle that would decide the fate of Sparta. The final, decisive conflict took place in 222 BC at the Battle of Silesia, a narrow mountain pass on the northern frontier of Laconia. Cleomenes, despite being heavily outnumbered, chose this defensive position to negate the enemy's numerical superiority and to leverage the tactical advantage of the terrain. He fortified the pass, placing his forces on two hillsides that flanked the main road. His army consisted of his newly reformed Spartiates and a large contingent of mercenaries, totaling approximately 20 men. He positioned his brother Euclides on one hill and commanded his own forces from the other. Antigonus Doson's army, a formidable force of roughly 28 men, was a classic example of a Hellenistic combined arms military. It was comprised of a powerful Macedonian phalanx, Achaean hoplites, and a significant number of allied cavalry and light infantry. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long pikes, the sarissa, was a tactical innovation far more formidable than the conventional hoplite formation. Antigonus's strategy was a multi-pronged assault designed to overwhelm Cleomenes' forces. He would use his heavy infantry to engage the Spartan phalanx in a head-on clash in the pass, while his cavalry and light troops, under the command of Philopoemen of Megalopolis, were to outflank the Spartan positions on the hills. The battle began with a series of skirmishes between the light infantry and cavalry. The decisive action occurred when Antigonus ordered his Macedonian phalanx to advance. The dense, disciplined column of pikes marched forward, its long spears creating an impenetrable hedge. Cleomenes' reformed Spartiates, fighting for their city's independence, put up a fierce resistance, but they were unable to withstand the relentless pressure of the Macedonian formation. Simultaneously, the flanking maneuver was successful. Philopoemen's forces, having found a weakness in the Spartan position, were able to attack the rear of Euclides's troops, causing chaos and a rapid collapse of that wing. With his forces now surrounded and his line breaking, Cleomenes' army was completely routed. The defeat was an annihilation. Most of the reformed Spartiates were killed in the battle, and Cleomenes himself was forced to flee. For the first time in its history, the city of Sparta was occupied by a foreign army. The Battle of Silesia was not just a military defeat. It was the final nail in the coffin of an independent Sparta, marking the end of its long, painful decline and the complete subjugation of a city-state that had once been the undisputed master of Greece. The catastrophic defeat at Silesia left Sparta in a state of political and military ruin, but its final demise as an independent power would not be brought about by its Greek rivals. The final, irreversible subjugation of Sparta was a result of the rising power of a new and formidable force in the Mediterranean, the Roman Republic. The Romans, with their highly organized legions and a pragmatic approach to conquest, gradually extended their influence over the Greek world. This was not a swift invasion, but a methodical process of political and military entanglement that ultimately left the Greek city-states with no choice but to submit. Sparta's decline in the wake of the Hellenistic Wars left it as a weakened and isolated state. Its military power, once the fear of all Greece, was now a pale shadow of its former self. The city was a regional player at best, and its political machinations were often focused on minor conflicts and disputes with its immediate neighbours, particularly the Achaean League. This continued rivalry provided the Romans with a pretext for intervention. The Romans, in their efforts to establish their own dominance in Greece, often played the role of a mediator in Greek disputes, a diplomatic strategy that allowed them to insert their authority into local politics. The pivotal event that brought Sparta into direct conflict with Rome was the Roman-Syrian War in the early 12th century BC. The Achaean League, which had allied itself with Rome's rival, the Seleucid Empire, was a target for Roman military action. When the Achaean League took a stance against Rome, Sparta, seeking to regain its lost territory, allied itself with the Romans. This was a temporary and transactional alliance that proved to be a fatal strategic miscalculation. While it did allow Sparta to regain some of its lost territory from the Achaean League, it also placed it firmly within the Roman sphere of influence. The final act of subjugation came with the Achaean War in 146 BC. The Achaean League, resentful of Roman interference, rose in a desperate but ultimately futile rebellion against Roman authority. Sparta, still a nominal ally of Rome, was spared the full force of Roman military action. The Roman army, commanded by the general Lucius Mummius, swiftly crushed the rebellion, sacking and destroying the city of Corinth as a brutal message to all Greek city-states. The destruction of Corinth, one of the last bastions of Greek independence, marked the end of an era. Following the war, Rome reorganized Greece into the province of Achaia. While some city-states were allowed to maintain a semblance of local autonomy, their independence was a fiction. They were subject to Roman law and Roman authority, and they were required to pay tribute. Sparta, with its unique political system and its legacy of military glory, was allowed to maintain a degree of local self-government, but its power was completely gone. Its famed military system, its Lycurgan constitution, and its social structure were now relics of the past. The Romans had no need for a professional army of disciplined hoplites. The legion, with its superior organization and tactical flexibility, had rendered the phalanx obsolete. Sparta, which had so fiercely fought to maintain its independence, was now a mere historical curiosity in a world that had been conquered by a power it could not comprehend. Its final subjugation was not a glorious military defeat, but a quiet, almost imperceptible absorption into a vast and unyielding empire. The era of the independent Greek city-state was over. The Roman conquest of Greece marked the end of Sparta's military and political independence, but it did not lead to the city's total annihilation. Instead, Sparta entered a new and paradoxical phase of its existence. Under Roman rule, the city's glorious and austere past became its most valuable asset. The place that had once been a formidable military power was transformed into a historical curiosity, a living museum of its own traditions, where wealthy Romans came to experience the legends of its martial past. Roman Sparta was a city fundamentally altered by the new political reality. Its famed military system was a relic. The agoge, the rigorous training regimen that had defined Spartiate masculinity for centuries, was no longer a state-mandated necessity for producing an army. Instead, it was reduced to a performative spectacle, a public event that was staged for Roman tourists. The legendary endurance contests, the wrestling matches, and the martial dances were now a form of entertainment, a public display of a bygone era's virtues. This was not a military training ground, but a theatrical performance of its own historical legacy. The city's economic foundation also underwent a profound shift. The Spartan ideal of a society that scorned luxury and wealth was completely abandoned. The city began to profit from tourism, a new industry that catered to the Roman elite. Wealthy Romans, fascinated by the history of Leonidas and the 300, flocked to Sparta to see the places where these legends had unfolded. This influx of Roman money led to a new prosperity that was based not on helot labor or military conquest, but on the exploitation of its own cultural heritage. The city that had once forbidden the use of gold and silver now welcomed it in the form of Roman currency. The physical appearance of Sparta also changed under Roman rule. While the city had famously lacked monumental architecture in its classical heyday, it now began to acquire public buildings in the Roman style. A large Roman theatre was constructed, as were baths, porticos, and a new forum. These buildings were not a reflection of a resurgent Spartan spirit, but a consequence of Roman patronage and the needs of its new tourist economy. The city was physically remade to cater to the tastes of its new visitors, a visual testament to its transformation from a military power to a historical spectacle. The political system of Roman Sparta, while allowed to maintain a degree of local autonomy, was also a shadow of its former self. The dual kingship, the gerousia, and the ephors were now largely ceremonial offices, their true power stripped away by the Roman governor of the province of Achaia. The citizens, no longer bound by the rigid laws of the Lycurgan constitution, became a privileged, land-owning class who enjoyed the benefits of Roman peace and Roman prosperity. The Spartan man, who had once been a full-time warrior, was now a wealthy landowner, a provincial magistrate, or a tour guide. The Spartan way of life, with its communal messes and its rejection of luxury, was now a historical curiosity, a story told for the entertainment of Roman visitors. This new reality of Roman Sparta was a paradox. The city had finally achieved a form of lasting peace and prosperity, but it came at the cost of its identity. Its famous austerity was gone, replaced by the luxuries of Roman provincial life. Its military might was gone, replaced by the protection of the Roman legions. The city that had once defied the world was now a peaceful, prosperous, and politically irrelevant tourist attraction, a living monument to its own glorious past. The peaceful prosperity of Roman Sparta, a strange interlude in the city's martial history, would not last forever. The vast Roman Empire, which had provided the peace and stability for Sparta's tourist economy to flourish, was entering a long period of decline and political turmoil. New threats emerged from the north, and the legions, once an unassailable force, were increasingly unable to defend the empire's vast frontiers. This period of imperial decay would bring about the final violent end of the city of Sparta. The threat came from the Visigoths, a powerful Germanic people who had been pushed into Roman territory by the advance of the Huns from the east. Led by their king Alaric, the Visigoths crossed the Danube River in the late 4th century AD, seeking refuge and land within the empire. They were not a disorganized band of raiders, but a cohesive tribal confederation with a formidable military. After years of simmering tension and conflict with the Eastern Roman Empire, Alaric led his people on a campaign of plunder and conquest through the Greek mainland. In 396 AD, Alaric and his forces swept through Greece, a campaign that was marked by a series of sieges and military engagements. The Eastern Roman Empire's army, commanded by the general Stilicho, was unable to stop the Visigoths' advance. The Visigoths marched into the Peloponnese, a region that had been a bastion of peace under Roman rule. They entered the Laconian plain, a place that had once been defended by the most formidable army in Greece. Sparta, the city that had once held off the Persian army and led the Peloponnesian League, was now a hollow shell of its former self. Its military power was gone, its citizen army was a relic of the past, and its defences were weak and neglected. The city's famous walls, once a symbol of its power, were in disrepair. The Spartan men, who had once been full-time warriors, were now a privileged class of landowners and provincial magistrates, ill-equipped and unprepared to defend their city against a professional army. The Visigothic army, led by Alaric, met with little resistance as they marched through Laconia. While the exact details of the sacking of Sparta are scarce in the historical record, it is clear that the city fell to the invaders. Unlike the sack of Rome that would follow, the destruction of Sparta was a relatively minor event in the context of the Visigothic campaign. However, for the city itself, it was a profound and final act of violence. The city that had once been a symbol of military might was now a victim of a foreign army, a brutal end to a long and complex history. The sacking of Sparta by the Visigoths effectively ended the city's long and paradoxical existence. The city that had been a living museum of its own martial past was now a ruin. The Roman buildings that had been constructed to entertain tourists were destroyed, and the population was either killed, enslaved, or forced to flee. The sack of Sparta was a tragic but fitting end for a city whose existence had been defined by warfare. It was a final, violent act that brought its history full circle, from a military power in the Age of Heroes to a final, violent death at the hands of a new kind of warrior in the twilight of the Roman Empire. The once proud city of Sparta was now nothing more than a memory, a ruin in a silent valley. The violent end of Roman Sparta at the hands of the Visigoths was not an extinction of the region's people, but a transition into an age of obscurity. For centuries following the sack, the site of the ancient city lay largely abandoned. The population, what little remained, retreated from the vulnerable plains to the safety of the formidable Taygetos mountains. The memory of the martial city-state, once the pride of Greece, faded into the landscape, its impressive ruins serving as a source of building materials for small, scattered settlements in the area. This was the Dark Age of Laconia, an extended period of depopulation and political fragmentation under the nominal authority of the Byzantine Empire. The region's history, however, would be re-energized by the arrival of the Franks in the 13th century. Following the Fourth Crusade, the Peloponnese was conquered by the Franks, who established the Principality of Achaia. The Frankish Prince William II of Villehardouin, recognizing the strategic importance of the Taygetos Mountains, constructed a fortress on the steep eastern slopes of the range in 1249. This new stronghold, Mistra, was built to dominate the Laconian plain and to provide a secure base against local resistance. Mistra was a testament to the new political realities of the region, a feudal castle built by a foreign power on a site that commanded the ancient heartland of Sparta. The fortunes of Mistra would soon change. After its capture by the Byzantines in 1262, the city became the center of a new political and cultural revival. It was made the capital of the Byzantine Despotate of Morea, a semi-autonomous province of the Byzantine Empire. This new capital, built on the slopes of the Taygetos, quickly grew into a vibrant, prosperous, and culturally rich metropolis. Its strategic location, its powerful fortifications, and its role as a regional administrative center made it a beacon of Byzantine civilization in a region that had been politically fragmented for centuries. Mistra became a center of art, learning, and philosophy, a flourishing urban environment that stood in stark contrast to the abandoned ruins of ancient Sparta below. The city's churches, monasteries, and palaces were decorated with magnificent frescoes and mosaics that are considered masterpieces of late Byzantine art. The city's intellectual life was equally impressive, with a notable school of philosophy that attracted scholars from across the Byzantine world. Figures like George Gemistos Plethon, a Neoplatonic philosopher, taught in Mistra, his ideas influencing the Renaissance in Italy. The city was a final, brilliant flowering of Byzantine culture before the fall of Constantinople. The rise of Mistra was, in many ways, a narrative that stood in stark opposition to the history of ancient Sparta. While Sparta had been a city of rigid discipline, austerity, and militarism, Mistra was a city of art, intellectualism, and spiritual contemplation. While Sparta had famously lacked monumental architecture, Mistra was a city of breathtaking beauty. Its churches and palaces a testament to its cultural wealth. Mistra thrived on the mountainside, a new city that rose from the ashes of a forgotten empire, its gaze fixed on the very landscape that had once been the heartland of a military power that had defined an age, a final, poignant commentary on the ephemeral nature of all human empires. The historical Sparta, a city defined by its military rigor and its insular society, eventually faded into obscurity. Yet its philosophical and intellectual legacy endured, exerting a profound and lasting influence on Western thought. The unique constitutional and social model of Sparta, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, became a subject of fascination for philosophers, political theorists, and historians across millennia. This was not an admiration for Spartan brutality or its system of serfdom, but a deep intellectual interest in a society that deliberately rejected wealth, luxury, and individual ambition in favor of a collective, disciplined, and egalitarian ideal. In the ancient world, Sparta's constitution was a primary source of debate and admiration. Aristotle, in his Politics, analyzed the Spartan constitution as a mixed government, praising its balance of monarchical, the kings, aristocratic, the Gerousia, and democratic, the Ephors elements. He viewed this combination as a source of its remarkable stability, a system that, unlike the extreme democracies or oligarchies of other city-states, was less prone to political upheaval. Plato, in his Laws and Republic, also drew heavily on the Spartan model, particularly its communal education system and its emphasis on virtue and collective good. The Platonic ideal of a society ruled by a warrior caste, where personal desires were sublimated for the good of the state, was a direct philosophical descendant of the Lycurgan reforms. The philosophical admiration for Sparta's mixed constitution and its stable social order continued to resonate with later thinkers. In the Roman world, figures like Cicero and Plutarch further popularized the Spartan model. Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus became a canonical text, a primary source for understanding the Spartan ideal. In it, Plutarch celebrated the Spartan virtues of austerity, bravery, and a profound sense of civic duty, presenting Sparta as a city of profound moral virtue, a stark contrast to the perceived decadence of the Roman Republic. The legacy of Lycurgus was revived with renewed vigor during the Enlightenment. Philosophers and political theorists, grappling with the problems of monarchy, democracy, and social inequality, found in Sparta a powerful, if idealized, model. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his Discourse on the Arts and Sciences, held up the Spartan rejection of luxury and its emphasis on civic virtue as an ideal to be emulated. He saw in Sparta a pure form of republican government, uncorrupted by the arts, commerce, and individualism that he believed had poisoned modern society. Later, in the 18th century, figures like Montesquieu, in his The Spirit of the Laws, and the American Founding Fathers, in their debates over the structure of the new American Republic, also looked to the Spartan model for inspiration. They saw in its mixed constitution a template for creating a stable and balanced government. The Spartan idea of a citizen army, where all citizens were expected to contribute to the defense of the state, was also a powerful influence on the early American Republic, which initially relied on a system of citizen militias. The intellectual legacy of Sparta, therefore, was a rich and complex one. It was not a simple admiration for militarism, but a deep philosophical engagement with the idea of a society that could deliberately and successfully create a stable, disciplined, and egalitarian system. Sparta, in its philosophical form, became a powerful symbol of a different kind of human society, a society that valued civic virtue and collective discipline over personal freedom and individual ambition. This enduring legacy ensured that Sparta, long after its physical city was in ruins, would remain a central and powerful idea in the history of Western political thought. The historical record of ancient Sparta is, in many ways, a narrative filtered through the eyes of its rivals, particularly the Athenians. The Spartans themselves were notoriously laconic, and left behind very few written records of their own. As a result, much of what is known about Spartan society, its constitution, and its way of life, comes from the writings of Athenian historians, philosophers, and political theorists. While invaluable, these sources must be read with a critical understanding of the profound ideological and political biases of their authors. The Athenian perspective on Sparta was often a complex mix of grudging admiration, envy, and deep-seated rivalry, a lens that both glorified and distorted the Spartan reality. The most important of these Athenian sources is the historian Thucydides, whose history of the Peloponnesian War is the primary account of the conflict that defined the late classical period. Thucydides, a meticulous chronicler of events, provided a detailed account of the Spartan military machine, its strategies, and its political machinations. His writing is sober and analytical, but it is not without its biases. Thucydides, a product of Athenian democratic society, was often critical of Sparta's slowness to act and its conservative nature. He was an admirer of political expediency and strategic innovation, and he often portrayed the Spartans as a cautious and unimaginative power. His work, while an essential historical document, reflects the worldview of an Athenian who saw Sparta as a rival, a philosophical and political opposite. Xenophon, another Athenian historian and a disciple of Socrates, offered a different, though equally biased, perspective. Having spent time in Sparta and having had a deep personal admiration for the Spartan system, Xenophon's Constitution of the Spartans is a foundational text for understanding the Lycurgan reforms. Xenophon praised the Spartan virtues of discipline, obedience, and self-control, and he portrayed Sparta as an idealized society of profound moral virtue, a direct counterpoint to the perceived political corruption and moral decadence of Athens. His account, while invaluable for its details, is a highly idealized and hagiographic work. It is a work of political theory, as much as it is of history, a philosophical argument for the superiority of the Spartan system over Athenian democracy. Herodotus, the father of history, writing in the mid-5th century BC, provided the first extensive account of the Spartan role in the Persian Wars. His histories are filled with stories of Spartan bravery and sacrifice, particularly his account of the Battle of Thermopylae. Herodotus's narrative, while acknowledging the Spartans' flaws, celebrates their discipline and their unwavering commitment to a collective defense of Greece. His work helped to establish the heroic myth of Sparta for a Greek audience. The Athenian sources, therefore, provide a picture of Sparta that is not a straightforward historical record, but a multifaceted and often contradictory narrative. They were writing not for us, but for a contemporary audience that was engaged in a bitter political and military rivalry with the Spartan state. Our understanding of Sparta is thus filtered through the admiration of Xenophon, the critical eye of Thucydides, and the mythic lens of Herodotus. This is a complex and challenging reality for modern historians, who must constantly work to separate the historical facts from the ideological and political narratives of the very sources that provide them. The truth of Sparta, therefore, is a truth that must be constantly negotiated, a historical reality that is forever intertwined with the perspectives of those who were its rivals and its admirers. The Spartan military, for all its limitations and eventual decline, left an indelible mark on the history of warfare. Its concepts of discipline, unit cohesion, and the professional soldier served as a model for military thought and practice for millennia. While other Greek city-states relied on citizen militias who trained only occasionally, the Spartans created a standing army of full-time warriors. This was a direct result of their unique social system, which liberated them from manual labor and allowed them to dedicate their entire lives to training and combat. This model of the professional soldier, a man whose sole purpose was to fight for the state, became a powerful and enduring ideal. The influence of the Spartan military was evident in the development of the Roman legions. While the Roman army was a much more complex and technologically advanced force, its principles of discipline and obedience were a direct philosophical descendant of the Spartan model. The Roman centurion, a career soldier who commanded with unwavering authority, embodied the Spartan ideal of the professional warrior. The Roman army's emphasis on rigorous training, physical endurance, and a profound sense of loyalty to the state and its commanders was a practice that had been perfected by the Spartans centuries earlier. The Roman military machine, which would go on to conquer the Mediterranean world, was built on a foundation of discipline that had been perfected in the Spartan barracks. The Spartan model of a professional army also had a lasting impact on later military thinkers and strategists. The rigid, disciplined phalanx, while eventually rendered obsolete by the more flexible formations of the Hellenistic and Roman eras, was a testament to the power of unit cohesion and psychological indoctrination. The Spartan soldier was not just a man with a spear and a shield. He was an integral part of a larger, indivisible fighting machine. This concept, that the strength of the army lay not in the individual but in the collective, was a profound and enduring lesson. The Spartans' ability to hold a line against overwhelming numbers, as they did at Thermopylae and Plataea, was a result of this cohesion, a result of men who had spent their entire lives training and fighting together. The Spartan influence can also be seen in the development of military academies and the concept of a professional officer corps. The Spartanagoge, for all its brutality, was a state-sponsored educational system designed to produce leaders and commanders. The mentorship of older boys over younger ones, the constant testing of their skills and endurance, was a form of leadership training that was centuries ahead of its time. This system, which produced commanders who were not only courageous but also strategically sound, was a direct precursor to the modern military academy. The modern military, from its concepts of special operations forces to its emphasis on physical training and unit cohesion, still draws inspiration from the Spartan model. The image of the Spartan warrior, a man whose life was a testament to discipline, endurance, and an unwavering commitment to his fellow soldiers, remains a powerful and enduring ideal. The Spartan military, therefore, was more than just an army. It was a philosophy of warfare, a set of principles that would influence the very nature of armed conflict for millennia to come. Its legacy, a legacy of discipline, courage, and a profound understanding of the power of the collective, endures to this day. The historical understanding of Sparta is deeply influenced by a phenomenon that modern historians call the Spartan mirage. This concept refers to the idealized and often distorted image of Sparta that was created by ancient writers, both Spartan and non-Spartan, and has been perpetuated by later generations. It is the difference between the reality of Spartan society and the philosophical and political ideal that it represented to its admirers. This idealized image of a perfectly disciplined, equal, and virtuous state, a mirage of a bygone era, has often obscured the complex and brutal reality of Spartan life. The origins of this mirage can be traced back to antiquity. Athenian writers in particular were instrumental in its creation. Figures like Xenophon, a man who deeply admired the Spartan system, wrote hagiographic accounts that celebrated its virtues and minimized its flaws. For Xenophon, Sparta was the perfect antithesis of a corrupt and decadent Athenian democracy. He portrayed the Spartans as a people of profound moral integrity, their lives a testament to the virtues of self-control, obedience, and military discipline. This idealized portrait was a powerful tool in his own philosophical critique of Athenian politics. This idealized image was also a product of Spartan propaganda. The Spartans themselves were masters of self-mythologizing. They cultivated a reputation for being an army of invincible warriors who scorned luxury and embraced a life of austerity. Their laconic wit, their endurance in battle, and their famous unyielding resolve were all part of a carefully constructed public image that was designed to intimidate their enemies and to inspire their allies. This was a form of psychological warfare, a powerful and effective narrative that was as much a part of their military strategy as their phalanx. The Spartan state, therefore, was not a place of spontaneous virtue, but a society whose public image was meticulously managed to serve its political and military interests. However, the reality of Sparta was often far more brutal and complex than this idealized image would suggest. The vaunted equality of the Spartiates was a fiction. Land ownership became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, and the gap between the rich and the poor grew wider in the later years of the state. The ideal of a life free from manual labor was a direct result of the enslavement of a vast population of helots, a system of brutal oppression and state-sanctioned terror that was at the very heart of the Spartan system. The celebrated discipline of the Spartiate male was born not of abstract virtue but of the constant existential fear of a helot uprising. The Spartan mirage, therefore, is a reminder that historical narratives are often shaped by the agendas and perspectives of their authors. It is a concept that forces us to look beyond the idealized image of a perfectly disciplined society and to confront the complex and often brutal reality of a state that was built on a foundation of oppression and fear. While the Spartan ideals of discipline and courage are powerful and enduring, they must be understood within the context of a society that was anything but egalitarian or virtuous. Sparta was not a utopian ideal, but a rigid and unyielding military machine, and the mirage that surrounds it is a testament to the power of propaganda and the enduring appeal of a myth. The history of Sparta is, in a very real and profound sense, also the history of the Helots. This was not a side note to the Spartan narrative, but its very foundation. The Helots were a subjugated population, a people who had been stripped of their freedom and reduced to a state of collective serfdom by the conquering Dorian elite. They were owned by the state, not by individual citizens, and were bound to the land, their primary purpose to work the agricultural plots that provided the material sustenance for the Spartiate class. This system of state-owned slavery was a unique social experiment, an economic engine that freed the Spartiates from manual labor and allowed them to dedicate their entire lives to military training and war. The Helots were a people in a state of perpetual struggle. They lived under a constant, pervasive threat of violence and oppression. Ancient sources, though often from a biased Athenian perspective, provide chilling details of their condition. The Spartans, in an effort to maintain control over a population that vastly outnumbered them, resorted to a form of state-sanctioned terror. They would ritually declare war on the Helots each year, a chilling tradition that allowed any Spartiate to kill a Helot without fear of legal retribution. This practice, along with the brutal actions of the Cryptia, a secret police force of young Spartan men, was a calculated and ruthless effort to keep the Helots in a state of fear and to prevent any organized resistance. Despite this brutal system of control, the Helots were a constant existential threat to the Spartan state. Their resentment was a simmering force that would, on occasion, erupt into full-scale rebellion. The Second Messenian War, a prolonged and brutal conflict, was a testament to their desire for freedom and their ability to resist a far more powerful enemy. The fear of a future Helot uprising was a permanent psychological force that permeated every aspect of Spartan life. It dictated their foreign policy, making them hesitant to send their full army on prolonged foreign campaigns for fear of leaving their homeland vulnerable. The profound, transformative effect of the Helot system extended to every facet of Spartan society. The Spartans' celebrated military discipline and austerity were not the result of a philosophical ideal, but a pragmatic necessity. The agoge, the barracks, and the syssitia were all designed to create a society of disciplined warriors who were perpetually ready to quell an internal rebellion. The Helot system also had a profound and, in the long run, detrimental effect on Spartan demographics. The Spartiate class, a small military elite, was in a state of slow but steady decline due to the high mortality rate of their military lifestyle. The Helot population, however, continued to grow, exacerbating the demographic imbalance and increasing the underlying fear that shaped Spartan policy. The history of the Helots, therefore, is not a separate narrative, but a central driving force of the Spartan story. Their enslavement was the source of Sparta's wealth and its military prowess. It was also the source of its profound social rigidity, its deep-seated fear, and its eventual decline. The liberation of the Helots in the 4th century BC was the final, fatal blow to the Spartan state, a testament to the fact that a society built on a foundation of oppression, no matter how disciplined or powerful, can never truly be free. The Helots were not just the victims of history, they were a force of history, and their struggle for freedom ultimately contributed to the undoing of their masters. For the Spartan state, war was not a temporary state of affairs, but the very purpose of its existence. This was a direct result of its unique constitutional and social engineering. With the Helot population providing the material sustenance, the Spartiate class was free to dedicate its entire life to military training and conflict. This created a professional, full-time army, a rarity in the ancient world, where other city-states relied on citizen militias who trained only occasionally. This system of permanent military readiness, a life of unending war, gave Sparta a profound and decisive advantage over its rivals for centuries. The Sparta of the classical period was a society on a constant war footing. From the moment a boy entered the agoge, his life was an unceasing preparation for battle. This relentless focus on martial discipline and physical endurance created an army of unparalleled cohesion and fighting prowess. The Spartan phalanx, a formation of men who had lived and trained together for a lifetime, was a formidable and often unstoppable force. This was demonstrated in battles like Plataea, where the Spartan line held against overwhelming numbers, and in its long and protracted war with Athens, where its military rigor was a constant, powerful force. However, this constant state of readiness, while making Sparta a formidable power, also had its profound and lasting drawbacks. The Spartan system was a rigid, unyielding one that was incapable of adaptation. Its military doctrine was centered on the hoplite phalanx and land warfare. It was a strategy that was highly effective in the Peloponnese, but it was ill-equipped for other forms of conflict. Sparta was slow to develop a navy, and was reliant on its allies for maritime power. This weakness was a major vulnerability that Athens exploited throughout the Peloponnesian War, and was a direct result of Sparta's singular focus on land warfare. The state, for all its martial genius, was a conservative force that was resistant to change and innovation. The unending war also had a profound and detrimental effect on Spartan society. Its all-encompassing military training and its anti-intellectual ethos stifled innovation in other fields. The arts, philosophy, and sciences, which flourished in other Greek city-states, were largely neglected in Sparta. The state, with its singular purpose, did not produce great poets, philosophers, or artists. It produced great warriors. This lack of intellectual and cultural diversity made the society rigid and brittle, a state that, while strong in one area, was profoundly weak in all others. The final and most profound drawback of this unending war was its impact on Spartan demographics. The military lifestyle, with its high mortality rate, coupled with a low birth rate, led to a slow but steady decline in the number of Spartiate citizens. This demographic crisis, which was exacerbated by the constant demands of warfare, was a terminal and irreversible problem. The state, for all its discipline, was slowly but surely bleeding itself to death. The unending war, a system that had been designed to make Sparta the most formidable power in Greece, was also the very thing that made it incapable of adapting to a changing world. It was a tragic paradox of a society that was so well engineered for a singular purpose that it was incapable of surviving when that purpose was no longer relevant. The decline of Sparta was not a singular event, but a gradual, quiet demise, rooted in the very system that had made it a great power. Its rigid, Lycurgan constitution, a masterpiece of social engineering designed for an era of hoplite warfare and a relatively insular Greek world, was not equipped to handle the complexities of a changing political and military landscape. The causes of its fall were internal, a direct consequence of the very system that had been designed for its survival. One of the most critical factors was the catastrophic loss of its citizen body. The Spartan system was predicated on the existence of a robust class of professional, full-time soldiers. However, the constant demands of warfare, coupled with the rigorous, high-mortality lifestyle of the agoge, led to a slow but irreversible demographic crisis. The number of Spartiates, which had once numbered in the thousands, plummeted to a few hundred by the 4th century BC. This demographic collapse, a terminal flaw in the Spartan system, meant that the state could no longer field a full army of its own citizens. This manpower crisis was exacerbated by a profound internal contradiction within the Spartan system: the issue of land ownership. The Lycurgan reforms had been designed to create an egalitarian society by guaranteeing every citizen a plot of land, a kleros, to be worked by helots. However, a law passed in the 4th century BC that allowed citizens to sell or bequeath their land led to a rapid and devastating consolidation of wealth. Land ownership became concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, while the majority of Spartiates were dispossessed of their plots and lost their full citizenship. This growing inequality, a direct violation of the Lycurgan ideal, fractured the social cohesion of the Spartan state and created a deep and lasting division between the rich and the poor. Finally, the Spartan military doctrine, which had been the source of its dominance, became a source of its downfall. The Spartan phalanx, a formation of men armed with shields and spears, was a rigid and unyielding force that was designed for a specific kind of warfare. However, in the 4th century BC, military tactics evolved. Thebes, led by Epaminondas, proved at the Battle of Leuctra that the Spartan phalanx could be defeated by a more flexible and innovative strategy. The rise of the Macedonian phalanx, with its longer pikes and its combined arms approach, rendered the traditional Spartan formation obsolete. Sparta, a conservative force that was resistant to change, was unable to adapt its military doctrine to the new realities of a more fluid and flexible form of warfare. The fall of Sparta was, therefore, not the result of a single military defeat or the conquest of a foreign power. It was the result of a system that was unable to adapt to its own flaws and the demands of a changing world. The loss of its citizen body, the growing inequality that fractured its social order, and its inability to adapt its military doctrine to new tactical innovations were all internal contradictions that led to its slow, quiet, and irreversible demise. The city, for all its martial glory, was a victim of its own success, a state that was so well engineered for a specific purpose that it was incapable of surviving when that purpose was no longer relevant. The end of Sparta was a tragic but inevitable consequence of a system that was designed for one era but was unable to evolve into the next. The story of Sparta, after its decline and the abandonment of its ancient site, re-emerges in the modern era not through military conflict, but through the patient and methodical work of archaeologists. For centuries, the legacy of the city was a matter of textual history and legend, its physical remains buried beneath centuries of soil and the foundations of later settlements. The ruins were largely unexamined, and the site of the ancient city remained a blank space on the historical map. It was not until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that systematic excavations brought Sparta back from obscurity, revealing the physical reality of a city that had been a powerful force in antiquity. The initial archaeological expeditions were conducted by the British School at Athens, a team of dedicated scholars who began their work in the late 19th century. Their first priority was to locate and identify the city's key monumental structures, a challenging task given the absence of visible ruins and the overlay of later Roman and medieval settlements. The excavations were focused on the Acropolis of ancient Sparta, the central hill that had once been the heart of the city-state. The work, though slow and painstaking, began to yield results. The archaeologists uncovered the foundations of a large theatre, a structure that would have been used for public festivals and gatherings. This discovery was a significant one, as it revealed a public space that was a central part of the city's civic life. Further excavations led to the identification of the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, a temple dedicated to the goddess of the hunt, and a key site for Spartan religious and cultural practices. This was a site of immense historical importance. It was here that Spartan boys, as part of the agoge, underwent their famous endurance contests, a brutal rite of passage that involved being flogged in front of an altar. The archaeological findings at this site, which included votive offerings and the remains of the temple itself, provided a tangible link to the rituals and practices that defined the Spartan way of life. The rediscovery of this sanctuary was not just an architectural find. It was a revelation that provided a physical context for the legends of Spartan discipline and endurance. The archaeological work also uncovered the foundations of a gymnasium and other public buildings, revealing a city that, for all its famed austerity, did have a civic life and monumental architecture. The excavations also revealed the massive defensive walls that surrounded the city, structures that had been built in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, a testament to the city's changing priorities in the later years of its existence. These walls, a direct contradiction of the Lycurgan ideal that the city's defense lay in its men, not its walls, provided a clear physical symbol of the city's slow, quiet decline. The rediscovery of Sparta was a process that unfolded over decades. It was a story not of a single, spectacular find, but of the gradual uncovering of a city that had been a powerful and enduring idea in the minds of men for centuries. The work of these archaeologists provided a tangible, physical context for the literary and historical narratives that had been our only source of information about Sparta. It revealed a city that was far more complex than the idealized image of the Spartan mirage would suggest. A city with a rich, if austere, religious and civic life. A city that had a history that was far more complex than its heroic myths would allow. The work of these scholars brought Sparta back to life, not as a military power, but as a place of historical and archaeological significance. A city of stone and legend that had been brought back from the ashes. The archaeological rediscovery of ancient Sparta was a long and methodical process, but it was preceded by a political act of rebirth. In the years following Greece's War of Independence, the newly formed nation sought to connect itself to its glorious classical past. The site of ancient Sparta, a name that resonated with ideals of courage and liberty, was an obvious choice for this nationalist impulse. In 1834, by royal decree of King Otto of Greece, a new city was founded on the ruins of the old. This new city, named Sparta, was not an organic growth, but a deliberate act of historical revival, a planned urban centre built to honour the memory of the ancient city-state. The modern city of Sparta was a completely new entity, a product of 19th century urban planning. The initial layout was designed by the German architect Friedrich von Gartner, who envisioned a rectilinear city with wide, tree-lined streets, public squares, and monumental buildings. This was a direct contrast to the cramped, chaotic nature of most medieval Greek towns. The city was built to accommodate a population of 10,000, with a focus on creating a rational and orderly urban environment. This new city was a physical manifestation of a modern nation's desire to connect itself to the idealized virtues of its classical ancestors. The development of modern Sparta, however, was not without its challenges. The new city was built directly over the ruins of the ancient one, a decision that has created a complex and challenging relationship between the old and the new. Early construction projects often destroyed or damaged the ancient remains that lay buried beneath the ground. The modern city's courthouse, for example, was built over the ancient agora, and its central square was built over a Roman-era sanctuary. This created a tension between the needs of a modern living city and the preservation of its ancient historical past, a tension that continues to this day. The modern city of Sparta, however, also embraced its ancient heritage. The city's planners, while building a new city, also made a deliberate effort to incorporate the ancient ruins into the new urban fabric. The Roman theatre, for example, was left as an archaeological site, and its ruins were made accessible to the public. The Acropolis was left undeveloped, a historical park that served as a central point of historical identity for the new city. The city's museum, a cornerstone of its cultural life, was founded to house the artifacts that were uncovered during its construction and in later archaeological digs, a deliberate effort to preserve and present the city's ancient history. The modern city of Sparta, therefore, is a city of two histories. It is a modern, functioning urban centre with a thriving agricultural economy and a growing tourist industry. But it is also a city that is constantly in dialogue with its ancient past. Its wide streets and its public squares are built over the foundations of a city that was a beacon of discipline and austerity. Its identity is a complex mixture of its modern reality and its ancient memory, a testament to a modern nation's desire to connect to its classical ancestors. The modern city of Sparta is a living monument to its own history, a city that was reborn on the ruins of a past that was so powerful and enduring that it could not be forgotten. The physical city of Sparta, in its modern and ancient forms, has a rich and complex history, but its enduring power lies not just in its stones and ruins, but in the myth that surrounds it, a myth that has resonated with people across millennia. The story of Sparta, a narrative of self-sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering courage, has become an enduring idea, a powerful reminder of what a people can achieve when united by a single purpose. The reasons for this myth's longevity are multifaceted, rooted in a combination of historical fact, philosophical idealization, and the enduring human fascination with tales of heroic struggle. One of the primary reasons for the myth's longevity is its singular, powerful narrative. Sparta's story is a clear and uncomplicated one. A small group of highly disciplined warriors, through a life of rigorous training and a complete dedication to the state, became an unstoppable force. This is a powerful and compelling narrative that is easy to understand and to admire. It is a story that stands in stark contrast to the complex, often chaotic, and morally ambiguous political histories of other city-states. The Spartan narrative, with its clear heroes, its well-defined villains, and its unwavering commitment to a cause, is a perfect template for an epic tale. The myth of Sparta is also a testament to the power of a collective identity. The Spartan system, for all its brutality and its flaws, was incredibly successful at creating a sense of shared purpose and identity among its citizens. Every Spartan man was a soldier, every Spartan woman a mother of soldiers. This collective identity, which transcended the individual, is a powerful and attractive idea. In a world that is often fragmented and individualistic, the Spartan ideal of a society united by a single, all-encompassing purpose continues to hold a profound appeal. It is a powerful reminder of what can be achieved when a people are willing to put aside their individual differences and work toward a common goal. The myth of Sparta also endures because of its powerful and enduring symbolism. The image of the Spartan warrior, with his bronze shield and his crimson cloak, is a symbol of courage, discipline, and military might. The story of Leonidas and the 300 at Thermopylae is a legend of heroic sacrifice that has been retold and reinterpreted in countless forms. This is a myth that is so powerful that it has transcended its historical context and has become a part of the global cultural consciousness. The very word Spartan has entered our lexicon as a symbol of austerity, discipline, and unyielding resolve. Finally, the myth of Sparta endures because it speaks to a profound human desire for a sense of purpose and meaning. The Spartan way of life, with its constant struggle, its rejection of comfort, and its all-encompassing purpose, is a powerful and attractive alternative to the often shallow and materialistic nature of modern society. It is a reminder that there is a profound human satisfaction to be found in struggle, in discipline, and in a life that is dedicated to something larger than oneself. The myth of Sparta, therefore, is not just a tale of a long-dead city. It is a story that continues to live and to inspire, a story that speaks to a profound and enduring human longing for a life of purpose, a longing for a life that is, in its own unique and uncompromising way, a life of meaning. The enduring power of the Spartan myth, rooted in historical accounts and philosophical idealization, has found a new and vibrant life in modern media. The narrative of self-sacrifice and martial discipline, so central to the Spartan story, has been reinterpreted and retold in countless forms, from graphic novels and films to television and video games. This modern media has not only kept the Spartan myth alive, but has also transformed it, making it a central part of global popular culture and introducing it to new generations in a compelling and often highly stylized manner. One of the most powerful and influential modern depictions of the Spartan story comes from the graphic novel and film 300. Based on the Battle of Thermopylae, this narrative focuses on the heroic sacrifice of King Leonidas and his 300 Spartiates. The film in particular, with its highly stylized visuals and its focus on a small dedicated band of warriors fighting against a massive, overwhelming force, became a global cultural phenomenon. While the film's depiction is a highly fictionalized and anachronistic one, it was profoundly successful in distilling the core essence of the Spartan myth, a narrative of courage, discipline, and unwavering resolve in the face of impossible odds. It was a powerful and successful reimagining of a historical event that cemented the image of the Spartan warrior in the minds of a global audience. The Spartan narrative has also found a natural home in the world of video games. The medium, with its emphasis on combat and strategic decision-making, is a perfect platform for exploring the Spartan way of life. Games like the Assassin's Creed series place players within the heart of the ancient city, allowing them to experience the world of ancient Greece and to interact with the legends and myths of its past. Other games, like the God of War series, reimagine the Spartan warrior in a fantastical context, making him a central figure in a new mythological narrative. These games, for all their fictional elements, are instrumental in introducing players to the themes of the Spartan story, from the brutality of the agogoj to the honor of a heroic death in battle. The Spartan story has also been a subject of scholarly and historical documentaries. Films and television series, such as those on the History Channel, have provided a more detailed and historically accurate account of the Spartan system. They have explored the brutal reality of the Helot system, the political intricacies of its dual kingship, and the tactical innovations of its army. These documentaries have served as a valuable counterpoint to the fictionalized accounts, providing a more nuanced and historically grounded understanding of the Spartan state. They have brought the complexities of Spartan history to a wide audience, ensuring that the historical reality of the city is not lost to its mythology. The modern media's embrace of the Spartan story is a testament to its enduring power. The narrative of a small, disciplined people who are willing to sacrifice everything for their freedom continues to resonate in a world that is often chaotic and uncertain. The image of the Spartan warrior has become a global cultural touchstone, a symbol of courage and discipline that has transcended its historical context. This modern reinterpretation of the Spartan myth is not a simple repetition of an old tale, but a vibrant and dynamic reimagining that continues to keep a long-dead city alive in the minds of men. The Spartan military, the very engine of its power, was a force unlike any other in the ancient world. At the heart of this military machine was the phalanx, a dense, disciplined formation of heavily armed infantry known as hoplites. The effectiveness of this formation was not a matter of chance, but a direct result of a lifetime of military training and a profound sense of unit cohesion. The Spartan phalanx was an impenetrable shield wall, a force that advanced with a relentless and unwavering discipline that was designed to break the will of its enemies. The mechanics of the phalanx were deceptively simple. Each man, a hoplite, was armed with a long spear, a short sword, and a large circular shield known as an aspis. The hoplites would stand shoulder to shoulder in a dense formation, with each man's shield protecting not only his own left side, but also the exposed right side of the man next to him. This interlocking shield wall created a formidable defensive barrier, a bronze and wood wall that was nearly impervious to frontal assault. The strength of the formation lay not in the individual, but in the collective, in the unwavering discipline of the men who stood side by side, their lives dependent on the man next to them. The tactical genius of the Spartan phalanx lay in its disciplined advance. The Spartans were not a force of wild, chaotic fighters. They were a military machine that moved with a relentless, slow, and methodical pace, a disciplined advance that was designed to intimidate and to overwhelm. The sound of their advance, the rhythmic chant of their marching songs, and the sight of their bronze-clad formation moving as a single, indivisible unit was a form of psychological warfare that was often enough to shatter the resolve of a less disciplined army. This disciplined advance was not a natural talent, but a skill that was honed by a lifetime of military training in the agoge, a training that taught them to hold their formation under any circumstances. The Spartan phalanx was also a force that was capable of incredible feats of endurance. In battles like Plataea, the Spartan line held against overwhelming numbers for hours, its unwavering discipline and its unyielding resolve proving to be a more formidable weapon than the enemy's numerical superiority. The Spartans' ability to hold a line, to withstand a charge, and to advance under a hail of arrows and javelins was a testament to a military system that had been perfected for centuries. However, the phalanx was not without its weaknesses. Its very rigidity was its greatest flaw. It was an offensive weapon that was designed for a head-on clash on an open plain, and it was ill-equipped for other forms of combat. It was slow and inflexible, and it was vulnerable to flanking maneuvers and to light, fast-moving forces that could harass its flanks. This was a weakness that was eventually exploited by a new generation of military thinkers, particularly the Theban general Epaminondas, who proved at the Battle of Leuctra that the phalanx, for all its power, was not invincible. But for centuries, the Spartan phalanx was the undisputed master of the battlefield, a military machine that, through its discipline and its cohesion, was able to conquer the world. Its legacy is a testament to the enduring power of a military system that was built not on individual glory, but on a collective, unwavering resolve. The Spartan state, for all its celebrated virtues of discipline and courage, was built upon a profound and brutal contradiction. The existence of a small citizen body of warriors was made possible by the subjugation of a vast population of helots, a people who were in a perpetual state of resentment and, on occasion, full-scale rebellion. The fear of a helot uprising was a constant existential threat that shaped every aspect of Spartan policy. This internal security crisis necessitated a system of control that was as ruthless as it was methodical. At the heart of this system was a secret police force known as the Crypteia. The Crypteia, a word that translates as the secret things, was a chilling and unique institution. It was a rite of passage for young Spartan men, a final stage of the rigorous agoge training regimen. These youths, having completed their formal education, were sent out into the Laconian countryside with nothing but a short sword and minimal supplies. Their task was to live off the land and to terrorize the helot population. This was not an act of random violence, but a state-sanctioned practice of targeted intimidation and murder. The Crypteia was a form of political assassination, a method of eliminating any helot who showed a hint of leadership potential or a willingness to organize resistance. The purpose of the Crypteia was twofold. First, it was a brutal training exercise. It taught the young Spartiates the arts of stealth, guerrilla warfare, and survival in hostile territory. It was a final, practical test of the skills they had honed in the barracks. The youths were forced to live like shadows, to move unseen, and to strike without warning. This was a direct preparation for a life of a warrior, a life of violence and hardship. The Crypteia, therefore, was a final and brutal forge that molded a Spartan boy into a Spartan man, a man who was prepared for the ruthless realities of a life lived on a constant war footing. Second, and more importantly, the Crypteia was a tool of social control. The state ritually declared war on the helots each year, a chilling act that provided legal sanction for the actions of the Crypteia. This was a systematic and calculated effort to keep the Helots in a state of fear and to prevent any organized resistance. The Helots knew that at any time a Spartan youth could emerge from the shadows and kill them without trial or punishment. This pervasive sense of terror, a constant reminder of their subjugated status, was a key component of the Spartan system. It was a psychological weapon that was as effective as the Spartan phalanx itself. The Crypteia, therefore, is a powerful and sobering reminder of the fundamental brutality that underpinned the Spartan way of life. The celebrated virtues of discipline and courage were a direct result of a system of state-sanctioned terror and oppression. The Spartan state, for all its high-minded rhetoric about civic virtue and equality, was a society that was built on the foundation of a subjugated population, a foundation that was maintained by a constant, violent vigilance. The Crypteia was not a flaw in the Spartan system. It was an essential part of its design. It was a chilling and ruthless institution that revealed the dark, brutal truth of a society that was willing to sacrifice a part of its own humanity to maintain its power. The Crypteia is a stark and unyielding reminder that behind the glory of the Spartan shield wall lay a constant, pervasive terror. The history of Sparta is, in a fundamental way, a continuous struggle against the spectre of Helot rebellion. The enslavement of the conquered populations of Laconia and Messenia created a demographic time bomb, a small military elite ruling over a vast, hostile and resentful population. This was not a theoretical threat, but a constant and tangible reality that shaped Spartan policy, military strategy, and domestic affairs for centuries. The history of the Helots is therefore a history of an unending series of conflicts, from full-scale wars to sporadic uprisings, that defined the very nature of the Spartan state. The most significant of these conflicts, the Second Messenian War, was a brutal, protracted rebellion that pushed Sparta to the very brink of annihilation. This war, which lasted for over a decade in the 7th century BC, was a direct result of the Helot population's desire for freedom. It was a war of liberation that forced Sparta to commit its entire military to a desperate struggle for survival. The experience of this war was a formative one for the Spartan state. It was a direct catalyst for the institutionalization of the agoge, the rigorous training regimen that created an army of full-time professional soldiers, perpetually ready to quell an internal uprising. Even after the defeat of the Second Messenian War, the threat of Helot rebellion remained a constant factor in Spartan life. The Helots, though suppressed, never lost their desire for freedom. Their rebellions were often opportunistic, timed to coincide with a major Spartan military campaign abroad or a natural disaster that had weakened the state. The great earthquake of 464 BC, for example, which devastated Sparta and killed thousands of citizens, was immediately followed by a massive Helot uprising. This revolt, which is known as the Third Messenian War, was a full-scale conflict that lasted for over 10 years and forced Sparta to seek help from its Greek allies, including its rival, Athens. The fact that a natural disaster could immediately lead to a major internal war is a testament to the ever-present threat that the Helots posed. The fear of a Helot revolt was a permanent constraint on Spartan foreign policy. Sparta was often reluctant to engage in prolonged foreign campaigns or naval conflicts, as this would require its full military force to be deployed far from home. The prospect of leaving the Laconian plain undefended was a risk that Sparta was rarely willing to take. This strategic conservatism, which was often misinterpreted by its rivals as a sign of weakness, was in fact a rational and pragmatic response to its unique and precarious domestic situation. The Peloponnesian War, for example, was a conflict that was deeply influenced by the threat of a Helot rebellion. The Spartans were forced to commit a significant portion of their army to internal security, a factor that limited their ability to prosecute the war with a more aggressive strategy. The Helot revolts, therefore, were not just a series of isolated events, but a continuous and powerful force that shaped Spartan policy, military campaigns, and its ultimate destiny. They were a constant external pressure that forced Sparta to build a society of profound discipline and austerity. They were the source of Sparta's military rigor, but they were also the source of its profound vulnerability. The Helot rebellions were a constant reminder that a society built on a foundation of oppression and fear, no matter how disciplined or powerful, is a society that is never truly secure. The history of Sparta, therefore, is a history of a people who were in a perpetual state of war, not with a foreign enemy, but with their own enslaved population. The Spartan political system, while famously defined by its dual kingship, was in fact a far more complex and sophisticated structure. It was a mixed constitution, a blend of monarchical, oligarchic, and democratic elements, a deliberate system of checks and balances designed to prevent any single faction from accumulating too much power. The two other pillars of this government, alongside the kings, were the Gerousia and the ephors, institutions that held immense authority and were instrumental in the day-to-day governance of the state. The Gerousia, or the Council of Elders, was the most powerful oligarchic institution in Sparta. It was composed of 30 members, the two kings and 28 men over the age of 60. The 28 members were elected for life by the citizen assembly, a process that, according to ancient sources, was conducted by a show of acclamation. The Gerousia had two primary functions. First, it was the legislative body of the state. It prepared and proposed all laws and decrees that were to be presented to the citizen assembly. Without the Gerousia's approval, a law could not be passed. Second, it served as the high court for capital cases. It had the power to try citizens for serious crimes, including homicide, and to impose sentences of death or exile. This dual function of legislating and judging gave the Gerousia a profound and lasting influence on every aspect of Spartan life. The ephors, a word that translates as overseers, were the most powerful and, arguably, the most important political body in Sparta. They were a council of 5 men, elected annually by the citizen assembly. The ephorate was a democratic institution in principle, as any Spartiate citizen could be elected to the office. However, in practice, the ephors were often older, more established men who had a deep understanding of the Spartan system. Their power was extensive and far-reaching. They presided over the Gerousia and the assembly. They controlled the state's finances, and they were responsible for the conduct of the agogo. They were also the primary managers of Spartan foreign policy and could veto the decisions of the kings. Their most extraordinary power was their authority to summon the kings for trial, and even to depose them if they were found guilty of malfeasance. The relationship between these 3 pillars of government was a deliberate constitutional dance. The kings provided military leadership and a sense of continuity. The Gerousia provided the wisdom and stability of old age. The ephors provided a yearly check on power, a democratic element that held the kings and the elders accountable. This system of checks and balances was a highly effective one, ensuring that Sparta was a stable and politically coherent state for centuries. The ephors, in particular, were the linchpin of this system. They were the true political rulers of Sparta, and their authority was so extensive that even the kings, for all their divine lineage and military prowess, were forced to defer to their decisions. The Spartan constitution, therefore, was not a simple autocracy or a pure oligarchy, but a sophisticated political machine that, through the deliberate balancing of its different parts, was able to create a state of profound discipline and stability. The Spartan way of life, with its emphasis on austerity and military rigor, was a complete and total system that permeated every aspect of a citizen's existence, including their language. The Spartans, a Dorian people, spoke a distinct dialect of the Greek language, known as the Doric dialect, a form of speech that was characterized by its brevity, directness, and conciseness. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct reflection of their cultural and political values, a form of speech that was designed to be as efficient and as unadorned as their way of life. This direct and concise manner of speaking became known as laconic, a word that has entered our lexicon as a symbol of terse and direct speech. The Spartan mastery of this laconic wit was a part of their cultural and military identity, It was a form of communication that was highly valued, and was a direct contrast to the elaborate and often verbose rhetoric of the Athenians. The Spartans scorned long speeches and philosophical debates, believing that such pursuits were a waste of time and energy. Instead, they valued a form of speech that was direct, honest, and to the point. This was a language that was designed for the battlefield and the barracks, a language that was as unadorned and as efficient as their military tactics. The Spartans' reputation for their laconic wit is a matter of historical record, documented by a number of ancient writers, particularly the Athenians. They were the subject of a number of anecdotes and apocryphal tales that celebrated their ability to respond to complex situations with a simple, direct, and often devastatingly clever reply. One such story involves a diplomatic envoy from a city-state that was attempting to persuade the Spartans to join their military alliance. The envoy, after a long and elaborate speech, asked the Spartans for their reply. The Spartans simply replied, "We have forgotten the beginning of your speech, and therefore we do not understand the end." This was a perfect example of their ability to use their brevity not only as a form of wit, but as a form of political strategy. Another famous example of their laconic wit is a response that they gave to Philip II of Macedon. Philip, in a letter to the Spartans, threatened them with a dire warning. "If I invade Laconia, I will raze your city to the ground." The Spartans, in a simple and direct reply, sent back a one-word response, "if." This was not just a joke. It was a powerful and unyielding statement of their resolve. It was a single word that contained a complete and total defiance of the most powerful man in Greece. This was the essence of the laconic wit, a form of speech that was as much a weapon as their spear. The Spartans' mastery of the laconic wit was a direct reflection of their culture. It was a society that valued deeds over words, discipline over comfort, and the collective good above individual ambition. Their language was a living monument to these ideals, a form of speech that was as austere and as disciplined as their way of life. It was a form of communication that was designed not for poetry or philosophy, but for the battlefield. The laconic wit, therefore, is a powerful and enduring legacy of a city that, through its language, was able to create a unique and uncompromising identity. It is a reminder that in the history of human civilization, a single word, spoken with courage and conviction, can be a more powerful weapon than 1,000 spears. The history of Sparta, a narrative of military triumph and eventual decline, concludes not with a final battle, but with a return to the tranquil valley that had been its home for over a millennium. The story, now complete, leaves us to contemplate the enduring paradox of a people who were at once the most fearsome warriors in history and the custodians of a fragile, fading civilization. The final moments of Sparta's history were not glorious, but a quiet and almost imperceptible absorption into a new world that had moved on without it. The city of Sparta, after its final subjugation by Rome, ceased to exist as a military or political power. It became a historical curiosity, a place where Romans came to see a living monument to its own martial past. The city's ancient institutions, its dual kingship, its gerousia, and its ephors were all rendered obsolete. The Spartan man, who had once been a professional soldier, was now a provincial magistrate or a landowner. His life a quiet and peaceful one, a life that was a direct contradiction to the austerity and the military rigor of his ancestors. This new reality of Roman Sparta was a paradox, a city that had finally achieved a form of lasting peace, but at the cost of its identity. The final death of the city of Sparta came not from a single decisive military defeat, but from a gradual and brutal process of imperial decline. The Roman Empire, which had provided the peace and prosperity for Sparta's tourist economy to flourish, was itself crumbling. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, swept through Greece in the late 4th century AD, and Sparta, with its defences neglected and its military power gone, was sacked and destroyed. The city that had once been a symbol of military might was now a victim of a foreign army, a brutal end to a long and complex history. The sack of Sparta was not a glorious final act, but a final, violent moment in a long and painful decline. The legacy of Sparta, however, was not confined to its city's walls or its historical demise. It was a legacy that endured in the minds of men, a powerful and enduring idea that continues to resonate to this day. The Spartan myth, a narrative of self-sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering courage, has transcended its historical context and has become a part of the global cultural consciousness. The story of Leonidas and the 300 at Thermopylae is a legend of heroic sacrifice that has been retold and reinterpreted in countless forms. The very word Spartan has entered our lexicon as a symbol of austerity, discipline, and unyielding resolve. The enduring paradox of Sparta is that a society that was so well engineered for a singular purpose, war, was also a society that was destined to fail when that purpose was no longer relevant. The Spartan system, for all its martial genius, was a rigid and unyielding one that was incapable of adaptation. Its decline was a slow and quiet process, a long, agonizing descent from its position of supremacy. The city that had once been the undisputed leader of the Greek world was now a shadow of its former self, its military power diminished, its citizen body depleted, and its social system fractured by growing inequality. The end of Sparta was a tragic but inevitable consequence of a system that was designed for one era but was unable to evolve into the next. Our journey through the ages ends back in the silent valley of Laconia. We close our eyes, the narrative complete, as the gentle sounds of the Eurotas River carry us away, leaving us to contemplate the enduring paradox of a people who were both the most fearsome warriors in history and the custodians of a fragile, fading civilization. Their story is a reminder that in the history of human civilization, a single word, a single act of courage, can be a more powerful legacy than 1,000 years of empire.